Chapter 10:18, Handling Old Turtle Reliance. The ninth mountain and sea, somewhere in the starry sky. Far, far away from planet East Victory was a location very near the ninth sea. If you hovered in the starry sky in this spot and looked off into the distance, you would actually be able to see that between the ninth sea and the empty sky was a stretch of shadowy ruins. By passing through those ruins, you could arrive at the ninth sea itself. If you passed around them, however, it would take far, far longer. Those shadowy ruins were none other than the mysterious ruins of immortality. It was at this point that a blood-colored glow rose up above the ruins of immortality. In the blink of an eye, Patriarch Reliance's enormous form suddenly flew out. "Ha ha ha, Meng Hao, you little bastard, come on. You think you can find me here, huh?" Patriarch Reliance seemed incredibly happy, even ecstatic as he flew out. It was bad luck for the Patriarch to run into you on planet East Victory. This time, though, I'm going to hide in the ruins of immortality. I simply can't believe that you'll be able to track me down here. Ha ha ha, the Patriarch turns out to be the smartest one in the end. In all the ninth mountain and sea, nobody is as astute and circumspect as me. Feeling quite pleased with himself, Patriarch Reliance threw his head back and roared, then flew out across the ruins of immortality. However, it was at this point that he heard someone speaking behind him. "Listen up, old turtle," the voice said lazily. "The term astute and circumspect is something you should wait for other people to say about you. You can't use it to describe yourself." As soon as the voice rang out, a tremor passed through Patriarch Reliance. His enormous head slowly turned around, and when he looked behind him, his eyes went wide with disbelief and shock. He couldn't help but stare at his tail, where sat Meng Hao, smiling broadly at him. "You?" Patriarch Reliance gaped in shock. He clearly remembered that in the moment of his escape, Meng Hao should have been left on planet East Victory. Now it was clear, however, that the damned bastard had somehow teleported here with him. One couldn't blame Patriarch Reliance for being so extremely nervous that he didn't notice what had happened. Besides, Meng Hao's one-thought stellar transformation and its stellar teleportation were extremely bizarre. His lucky break of being able to reach the teleportation portal was something Patriarch Reliance had never considered possible. After emerging, he was too focused on what was ahead of him, and was too excited at having once again evaded Meng Hao to notice that, at some point, a blood-chilling figure had suddenly appeared on his tail. "Hey, old turtle, long time no see," said Meng Hao, waving at Patriarch Reliance, a bashful smile on his face. From the jovial way he chuckled, he looked like someone randomly meeting an old friend in an unexpected location. His appearance was very amiable. After staring in shock for a moment, Patriarch Reliance threw his head back and roared as if he were going crazy. The entire state of Zhao quaked on his back. "Meng Hao, this is going too far. I can't deal with this. I've run away from you a bunch of times now, you and your damned League of Demon Sealers. Damn it, Meng Hao, you little bastard. Why you? You just push people too far. I'm gonna eat you." Patriarch Reliance was on the verge of collapsing emotionally, and his heart was racked with grief. He was also enraged. There was nobody he wanted to see less than Meng Hao, and right now, in his moment of complete elation, all of a sudden, Meng Hao appeared on top of him. He was left feeling like he was about to go insane. The more he thought about it, the worse he felt. In fact, he felt himself to be the most tragic figure in all existence. Roaring, he opened his mouth and stretched it out toward Meng Hao, hoping to snap him up in one bite. However, even as his mouth neared Meng Hao cleared his throat and lifted his right hand up in front of him. "Come on, Patriarch, come scratch this itch for young master." A tremor ran through Patriarch Reliance, and his enormous head stopped in place. His eyes were bright red as he stared at Meng Hao, and yet, he didn't dare to really swallow him. The sealing hex inside of him was spinning, and therefore, he didn't dare to harm Meng Hao in the slightest. If he did, the hex would explode out violently. As soon as Patriarch Reliance's head stopped moving, Meng Hao walked forward and patted his head lightly. "That's a good turtle," he said, laughing. Come, let me see if those words I carved on your back that year are still there." Patriarch Reliance trembled and roared in rage. He felt wronged, provoked even, and couldn't help but cry out, "You little heaven-damned bastard, screw off." He felt like he was about to explode. He swished his tail with incredible force, flinging Meng Hao out into the starry sky. At the same time, he spun in place and then attempted to flee as fast as possible. However, in the moment that he flung Meng Hao away, Meng Hao produced the lightning cauldron. Electricity danced as Meng Hao switched places with a random animal in the state of Zhao. As soon as he appeared on Patriarch Reliance's back, he cleared his throat, then flickered to appear on Patriarch Reliance's head. He stamped down hard with his foot. "What do you think you're doing, Patriarch? It wasn't easy to arrange this reunion. What are you running away for?" Patriarch Reliance stared in shock, trembling. Eyes bloodshot, he roared. Apparently his rage had reached the pinnacle, and yet there was nothing he could do. He could not use any of his divine abilities to harm Meng Hao in the least. His aura exploded with power, transforming into waves of qi that surged out in all directions, causing Meng Hao to fly off of his head. Mist roiled out to surround Patriarch Reliance, covering his body as he tried to escape again. Meng Hao gave a cold harumph, then extended his hand and pointed toward Patriarch Reliance. "Demon Sealing 8th Hex." In the instant that Meng Hao called out, Patriarch Reliance's massive frame suddenly stopped in midair. Normally, the hexing magic of the League of Demon Sealers would not have much of an effect on anyone who had a vastly higher cultivation base than Meng Hao, and it would even produce a backlash. However, Patriarch Reliance already had demon sealing hexing magic inside of him, and was supposed to be Meng Hao's Tao protector. Therefore, he was virtually incapable of fighting back against the hexing magic. Meng Hao hadn't been aware of that years ago when they first met, and afterward, Patriarch Reliance had spent most of his time in hiding. But now that Meng Hao was the immortal realm paragon, his cultivation base was as different from before as heaven was from the earth. Now, he was able to sense the restrictive hexing magic that was already inside of Patriarch Reliance, which allowed his own hexes to completely control him. It was due to this that the moment Patriarch Reliance had seen how powerful Meng Hao had become, he had begun to panic. Meng Hao cleared his throat as he caught up with Patriarch Reliance. As he neared, Patriarch Reliance began to tremble and then recover from the 8th hex. In that moment, before Patriarch Reliance could begin to roar in rage, Meng Hao waved his hand once again. "Demon Sealing 7th Hex Karmic Hexing," Meng Hao said, waving his finger. However, there seemed to be no reaction. "There's no karma," he said, shocked. This was the first time he had ever encountered a situation in which there was no karma. He tried again a few more times, and upon finding that he only continued to fail over and over again, a strange light began to glow in his eyes. He was truly shocked. Patriarch Reliance, on the other hand, was so scared his blood was running cold. Thinking back to certain bad memories of the past, he bellowed in rage and then spit a beam of light out of his mouth. The light transformed into a flying dagger that slashed viciously toward Meng Hao. It seemed intent on slicing open the starry sky, completely separating Patriarch Reliance and Meng Hao. The flying dagger looked like a willow leaf and was seemingly ordinary. However, it emanated an ancient air and was clearly anything but ordinary. 8th Demon Sealing Hex. As soon as Meng Hao saw the flying dagger, his eyes widened and he waved a finger. Immediately, Patriarch Reliance was once again immobilized and his cultivation base was completely locked down. It wasn't that Meng Hao's own hexing magic was terrifying. Instead, it was because of the way it riled the restrictive spell already inside of Patriarch Reliance. That restrictive spell responded to Meng Hao's will and exploded out with power. The flying dagger was now no longer under Patriarch Reliance's control and stopped moving. When that happened, Meng Hao's eyes began to shine. He approached the flying dagger and waved his hand, causing it to fly into his hand. Then, right in front of Patriarch Reliance, he unleashed a writ of karma, binding the flying dagger to him with ties of destiny. When the 8th hex faded away, Patriarch Reliance let out a howl of grief. "My dagger, that's been my favorite flying dagger for years. You give it back to me this instant, Meng Hao. That's my treasured dagger." Why you just kill me, all right? Stealing my treasures is like ripping off my skin." "Meng Hao, why you?" Patriarch Reliance was on the verge of tears. He couldn't flee, nor could he hurt Meng Hao. Furthermore, every time Meng Hao unleashed hexing magic, the restrictive spell inside of him activated, causing him to fill with the desire to weep. Besides all that, to the miserly Patriarch Reliance, having a treasure stolen was worse than anything else. Meng Hao was like the bane of his existence, the source of the most tragedy in his entire life. In fact, when Patriarch Reliance contemplated how his life had turned out, tears would stream down his face. While Patriarch Reliance and Meng Hao were having their little reunion, which was tragic for one and joyful for the other, something else was happening on a planet not very far away from their current location. That planet was the 9th Mountain and Seas planet North Reed. That was the planet occupied by the Li clan, the Song clan, and the Wang clan. making it the home base of sorts for three of the great clans. Currently, the entire Li clan was garishly decorated with lanterns and banners. The whole place was infected with a spirit of joy, and everyone knew that in a month, Li Linger was to be married to the crown prince of the Fang clan from planet East Victory. Although quite a few clan members were somewhat critical of the matter, the sudden wedding had been arranged by the Li clan's Dao Realm patriarch, and besides, Li Linger's marriage to Meng Hao had been agreed upon long ago. Therefore, there was no one who could change the forming of the alliance between the two great clans. Of course, nobody in the Li clan was aware that Meng Hao had fled the marriage, nor was anyone aware of the actions of one particular young woman who was anxiously fleeing from planet North Reed, heading far off into the distance. That young woman was none other than Li Linger. It was impossible to tell how she did it, but no one detected her departure. After flying out into the starry sky, she patted her own chest in relief and sped off into the distance. "I'd marry a pig before I marry that blasted, heaven-damned Meng Hao," she said through gritted teeth. As it turned out, she had made the same decision as Meng Hao to flee the marriage. Unbeknownst to Li Linger, the Li clan Dao Realm patriarch, the middle-aged man, was actually watching her the entire time. His voice cool, he asked, "There were no mistakes in your calculations." Almost as soon as the words left his mouth, a black-robed man appeared behind him, illusory and somewhat blurry, making it impossible to see his features clearly. "My clan's augury magic cannot be mistaken. The chance to leave the 9 mountains and seas, to reunite the Li clan to the main branch of the clan, is completely tied to Meng Hao." The patriarch remained silent for a moment, then turned and paid no more heed to Li Linger. His voice cool, he said, "It won't do to force her. If she wants to leave, then leave things up to destiny." /expand. "Meng Hao, give me my treasured dagger back," howled Patriarch Reliance. Before losing the flying dagger, he actually hadn't cared about it very much. But now that it wasn't his anymore, countless memories about it suddenly flooded into his mind. Every memory that surfaced filled his heart with pain. Meng Hao pretended not to hear as he lifted his hand and waved his finger a few more times, employing the 7th hex. Patriarch Reliance's scalp went numb as Meng Hao then switched to the 6th hex. Glittering light could be seen as numerous magical symbols appeared on Patriarch Reliance's body. Next, another magical symbol appeared on his forehead, a symbol which was different than Meng Hao's own 6th hex. When Meng Hao saw it, he suddenly understood everything. "Aha, somebody else already used the 6th hex on you. Well then, I guess I'll try out the 5th hex." Looking very excited, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand. Shockingly, a tiny rift appeared in his palm. When Patriarch Reliance saw it, he was nearly scared out of his mind. "Mengao," he howled miserably. "What are you planning?" howled Patriarch Reliance. "Just what do you think you're going to do? You're pushing things too far." His body trembled violently, and he seemed to be on the verge of going mad. "I swear there's nobody who bullies people worse than you. Unlucky. I've got enough bad luck for 8 lifetimes. I was bullied by the League of Demon Sealers back in the day, and now I'm getting bullied by you. I ran all the way to planet East Victory to hide from you, you know. You think that was easy, huh? You think it was a walk in the park. Hey, what are you doing? You already stole my treasured dagger, what? What are you doing? Come on, tell me. Do you know how old I am? I'm your patriarch, remember." Meng Hao scratched his head, starting to feel a bit awkward. "All right, how about this?" he said, clearing his throat. "If you take me to the 9 Seas God world, I'll let you go for the time being. Then you'll have another chance to hide from me." He still happened to have the Jade slip given to him during the 3 Great Taoist Societies trial by fire, the one that was supposed to take him to the 9 Seas God world. Unfortunately, Fang Xiaodou had somehow found out about that, and had managed to negate the Jade slip, making it useless. Patriarch Reliance suddenly quieted down. After a moment of thought, he bitterly nodded his head. Of course, inwardly, he felt quite pleased and was even laughing coldly. "This little bastard is still a bit inexperienced. I'm adept at scheming and have deep foresight, so how could I possibly acquiesce to him?" Outwardly, he sighed and allowed Meng Hao to stand on him as he headed toward the 9th sea. After flying for a short time, however, Meng Hao lifted his right hand and caused a 5th hex rift to appear in his palm. "Patriarch," he asked with an enigmatic smile, "are you trying to take me into the ruins of immortality?" Patriarch Reliance suddenly trembled, and his heart filled with rage. However, when he thought about Meng Hao's restrictive spells, he once again began to bemoan his plight to himself as he immediately changed directions to skirt the ruins of immortality. Based on his current speed, it wouldn't take very long for him to get Meng Hao to the Ninth Sea. Meng Hao beamed at Patriarch Reliance as he slapped his bag of holding, causing the parrot to fly out. The meat jelly was attached to its foot as usual, and the jingling of a bell could be heard when the two of them appeared. As soon as the parrot flew out, it looked Patriarch Reliance up and down, then blinked and squawked, What a big turtle, so strange. How come he seems so familiar?" "Hey, it's you, I remember now. You're that big owl turtle from the Milky Way Sea." The parrot was now very excited. It flew out next to Patriarch Reliance's head and said, "You know, I was always very curious about what you ate to get so big. You're huge. Come, tell Lord Fifth and you'll get a reward." Not wanting to be outdone, the meat jelly bellowed, "Hey, Lord Third has rewards too." Meng Hao stood on Patriarch Reliance's head, completely ignoring the parrot and the meat jelly as they harassed Patriarch Reliance. With the two of them dogging the turtle, Meng Hao wasn't the least bit worried about any tricks he might attempt to pull. It was at this point that he turned back to look at the state of Zhao. A look of reminiscence appeared on his face as he took a step forward and then vanished. When he reappeared, he was on a mountain peak somewhere in the state of Zhao. The mountain looked different than the way he remembered it. It had been moved and been transformed throughout the years, but it was still the same mountain that he remembered, Mount Daqing. He stood there, recalling the past. He was currently standing in the same location he had been when he first stepped into the cultivation world, when he had met Su Qing. "Mount Daqing," he whispered with a sigh. As he looked down the mountain, he noticed that the river that had been there once was now nowhere to be seen. He turned his head again and saw that Yunji County had also disappeared. It would never again exist. The only thing left was this mountain, and the memories of Meng Hao's that it contained. After standing there quietly for a long time, he stepped out off the mountain. As he floated there, he could see that same cave from long ago, which still existed on the side of the mountain. After another long moment, he sighed and turned. Instead of leaving the state of Zhao, he went to the North Sea. Despite the vast changes to the lands, which left the entire state of Zhao different than before, this lake was still here, just as it had been. The water was calm and mirror-like, and when Meng Hao looked at it, he recalled all the events which had occurred in connection with the lake. Eventually, he caught sight of an actual boat out on the water. It was an old vessel, and an old man could be seen at the till, who looked at Meng Hao as he steered the boat toward the shore. A pot of alcohol was being warmed inside the boat, and a moment later, a beautiful young woman stuck her head out of the cabin and looked over at Meng Hao. "Do you remember my name?" she asked with a grin. "Guiding Trirane," he replied, smiling. As he stepped forward onto the boat, the old man smiled and bowed at the waist, then continued to steer the boat out across the water. The young woman sat across from Meng Hao, lifted up the pot of alcohol, and poured a cup. 1. The North Sea Lake and Guiding Trirane were introduced in Book 1. Meng Hao was helped by the lake in his advancement through the qi condensation level, which happened in Chapter 44. It brought him back to life after he was defeated in battle by Ding Xin of the Violet Fate. That battle started in Chapter 65. He eventually met Guiding Trirane in Chapter 89, and it was what she told him that helped him deal with Patriarch Reliance in Chapter 95. "Do you remember what you promised me?" she asked, her eyes glistening as brightly as the waters of the lake. "I promised that one day I would help you become a sea," he said. Smiling, he raised his cup and then drained it. The young woman smiled radiantly. "I want to become a huge, calm sea," she said earnestly. "I don't want there to be any waves or tides. I want to be peaceful and quiet, a sea like a mirror." Meng Hao nodded. "How many things have you promised to do in your life?" she asked. 4, he replied. "And how many of those promises have you fulfilled?" "None so far." "In that case, doesn't that mean I'll have to wait a lot longer?" Meng Hao smiled, raised his glass again, and took another drink. Almost in the same moment that Meng Hao and Guiding Trirane were reunited, something happened not too far away from where they were in the starry sky. The same ship appeared that all of the cultivators of the Ninth Mountain and Sea had been unable to detect. 2 people sat on the ship, one older and one younger, who had watched as Meng Hao opened the door of immortality and then his immortal meridians. The old man was looking out into the starry sky, where he could see Meng Hao and Patriarch Reliance. At that point, his eyes shone with a strange light, as well as interest toward Meng Hao. Next to him sat the young man, upon whose face could be seen a look of scorn. "A man and a turtle," the young man said with a sneer. "How well suited for each other, and then there's that parrot, they all match each other." "That man is no simple man," the old man said calmly. And that turtle is no simple turtle. As for that parrot, well, it's not just a simple parrot either. He looked over at the young man, and he seemed somewhat disappointed but didn't say anything further. "What do you mean, not simple?" the young man said loftily. "All right, so he opened the maximum number of immortal meridians and even became the immortal realm paragon. However, there are tons of people like that in our spirit star realm. They might not actually be immortals, but immortals are worth squat." "He's a true immortal," the old man said with a frown. "True immortal? What a joke. Isn't this the same paragon immortal realm that years ago innumerable almighty beings viewed with such desire? But now look at it. The only things left are 9 mountains. If I wanted to kill that guy, all I would have to do is wave my hand, and he would be dead." Killing intent flickered in the young man's eyes. Apparently, he felt that killing Meng Hao would be as easy as crushing an ant. "I might as well target this guy for my training. I need to kill an immortal and bring that person's head back to the spirit star realm. I imagine they'll make it into a battle trophy." The young man licked his lips. 2. A note about the word realm. The word realm used here is the one that refers to a world or even dimension. It's the same word we've seen in the term mountain and sea realm that has already appeared in the story. The Chinese word for the realms of cultivation, spirit realm, immortal realm, ancient realm, Tao realm, is different. In most situations, the difference is clear from the context of the story. Cold light gleamed in the old man's eyes as he looked over at the young man. "He's a true immortal, not the type from this age, but rather the type from primordial times. He embodies what immortals truly are, the type that in ancient times could descend to our spirit star realm and cause everyone in the world to bow in worship. In the past, our spirit star realm was nothing more than one of the 3,000 realms below the Paragon Immortal realm. When the Paragon Immortal realm collapsed due to various reasons, the role that our world played was microscopic. You look down on that turtle and think it's ordinary, but you know what? When I look at it, it frightens me. I can sense some terrifying undulations coming off of that thing. And finally, about that man you so look down upon. Don't tell me you can't detect that there's something about him connecting him directly to the 9 mountains and seas." As the man spoke, his wording grew sharper and sharper. By the end, he was clearly rebuking the young man. The young man sat there quietly, his face slowly growing blue with rage. He didn't dare to backtalk, but when he lowered his head, his eyes were venomously icy. "Although this place has crumbled down to its present level," continued the old man, "you cannot rashly provoke the people here. Actually, I never wanted to come face the dangers of this place, but since your father insisted, I brought you here for your immortal killing baptism. I was forced to agree, and here we are. If you want to try to kill that man, I won't stop you. However, your father will be able to see all the records of our journey and cannot blame me if you seek your own death." As his cold words rang out, the old man waved his right hand, causing a vortex to appear up ahead. Within the vortex was an image of Li Linger, who was currently in the middle of fleeing from her wedding. "This girl is a bit weaker and is also an immortal. Why don't you kill her for your baptism?" As the old man spoke, the young man looked up at Li Linger within the vortex, and his eyes began to shine with a strange light. "Wow, she's pretty. Master, you wouldn't mind if before killing her I indulged in the services of an immortal, would you?" The old man frowned and looked a bit disgusted, but didn't say anything. The young man licked his lips and then stepped toward the vortex. Li Linger sat cross-legged atop a flying shuttle which sped through the stars. She was also heading toward the 9th sea, although not to the 9 seas god world, but rather to find an island where she could practice cultivation. She hoped to borrow some of the power of the 9th sea to stabilize herself in the immortal realm. She wasn't unfamiliar with the 9th sea, considering that she had been there on clan training on several occasions in the past. To her, this would all be a walk in the park. However, all of a sudden, the starry sky up ahead distorted, and a vortex suddenly appeared. An arrogant young man stepped out of the vortex, and as soon as he looked over at her, an evil and bizarre glow could be seen in his eyes, almost as if he were a hunter looking at prey. Li Linger's eyes instantly flickered with vigilance. She had never seen this young man before, but she could instantly sense that he was dangerous. Furthermore, the way he was looking at her didn't please her one bit. "Hello, immortal beauty, remember my name. I'm Zhang Linfa, you can call me Yifazi one. Zhang Linfa's name in Chinese is Zhang Lin Fa. Zhang is a family name. Lin means forest and Fa is a character that can mean many things including law, magic, and dharma. Yifazi is a somewhat strange name that appears to be some sort of nickname. Yifazai. Yi means one. Fa is the same character from his name. Zai means son or child. It's a weird name, and I think it's some sort of nickname pattern made up by Urgen. You might remember a character from earlier in the book named Xianxia, small-headed guy, whose name followed a similar pattern. I think there was even another minor character with a similar name. Despite consulting with several people, searching online, etc., I couldn't find any information on the name structure, which is what leads me to believe it might be something made up by Urgen. Remember it because very soon I'll provide you with the most unforgettable experience of your whole life, and also, the young man said with a smile. He stepped toward Li Linger. Chapter 10:19, The Hunting of Li Linger. Chapter 10:20, Brushing Past. In an area in the starry sky near the ruins of immortality, what appeared to be a huge land mass was cruising along. If you looked closely, you would find that it was in fact no land mass, but rather a gargantuan turtle. The turtle had a very sullen appearance and his eyes shone with ferocity. He appeared to be enraged, yet didn't dare to speak up about it. Instead, he just flew along through the stars. Meng Hao sat cross-legged somewhere on top of the turtle, sipping alcohol. Guiding Trirane sat next to him, smiling as she kept the pot of alcohol warm. The sweet fragrance of alcohol spread out in all directions, and Meng Hao felt incredibly at ease. When he thought about how he had successfully fled the marriage, he suddenly felt as if the whole world was full of boundless possibilities. Although he had practiced cultivation for many years, this was his personality. Although it might seem unstable, that was how Meng Hao liked it. He didn't want to settle down in one place. He wanted to do as he pleased. In his view, when it came to the path of cultivation, sitting around doing nothing was completely boring and meaningless. His Tao was the Tao of freedom and independence, which was the same as his personality. Everything he did in life was in accordance with his personality. Patriarch Reliance, on the other hand, was currently so irritated that his gums itched. It was compounded by the condescending parrot, who continually squawked in his ear, trying to get him to agree to be a younger brother. That made Patriarch Reliance even more furious. If that were all there were to it, Patriarch Reliance could endure the situation. However, the meat jelly's non-stop jabbering had pushed him to the brink of collapse. The garrulous chattering was almost like a magical curse, and Patriarch Reliance wondered how Meng Hao could possibly stand to have the thing around all the time. It couldn't be easy. Damn it, the Patriarch is always so unlucky, he thought. I have to get the little bastard to the 9th sea as soon as possible. Then I'll completely leave the 9th mountain and sea and never come back. I refuse to believe that if I hide somewhere outside of this mountain and sea, that the little bastard will be able to find me. Patriarch Reliance felt quite wronged, and was snarling and raging inwardly. He truly felt that he was being treated unfairly. In his opinion, ever since he ran into the League of Demon Sealers, his life had become as gray as ash. One of these days, he blustered inwardly, the Patriarch is going to swallow the entire League of Demon Sealers. Fudge, I'll give those Demon Sealers some good fortune if you know what I mean. Perhaps because of his continuous internal cursing, at some point he lost track of which direction he was traveling in, and started to drift toward the ruins of immortality again. Meng Hao cleared his throat and then waved his hand toward Patriarch Reliance's rear end. At the same time he glared and cried out, "Wuoa!" Although he actually unleashed the 8th demon sealing hex, the words that came out of his mouth were the same commands you would use when riding a horse. As soon as the 8th hex was utilized, Patriarch Reliance ground to an instant halt. The end result was that Meng Hao truly did appear to be riding Patriarch Reliance just like a horse. Patriarch Reliance's eyes went wide and he began to tremble. After a few breaths of time, his body returned to normal, and he threw his head back and roared a sullen and bitter roar. He had lived for a very long time, so how could he not understand the meaning of the word woe? Meng Hao, you little bastard, I'm Patriarch Reliance, not some horse, not some beast of burden. Meng Hao cleared his throat. Having been raised as a scholar, he knew the command words for riding horses but had rarely had a chance to actually use them. Now that he was sitting atop Patriarch Reliance, he naturally recalled all of those words. Fine then, giddy up. As soon as he said the word giddy up, Patriarch Reliance started moving forward without even thinking about it. Moments later, he almost exploded with rage as he realized that he was subconsciously cooperating with Meng Hao's horse-riding commands. I'm gonna eat you, you hear, Patriarch Reliance raged. Trembling, he was just about to lift his head up when Meng Hao anxiously said, easy now. At the same time, he tossed out a 5th demon sealing hex rift to the right side of Patriarch Reliance's head, scaring him into instantly turning. Yet again, he subconsciously cooperated with Meng Hao's verbal commands. Meng Hao, Patriarch Reliance, threw his head back and roared. The sound echoed out into the starry sky, eventually reaching a location not too far off, where it was heard by Li Linger, who was currently fleeing for her life. Blood oozed out of the corners of her mouth, and her beautiful face was as pale as a corpse's. Her clothing was torn, and her flesh was cut in numerous locations. She almost looked as if she had been forcefully taken advantage of. On her forehead was a jagged wound, from which blood spurted out and dropped down into the starry sky. Her hair was in disarray, and her aura weak as she pressed onward. However, her eyes blazed with fury. How could she ever have imagined that after successfully fleeing her clan, she would encounter a terrifying cultivator like this on her path to the Ninth Sea? The young man who called himself Yifazi was a complete stranger. Therefore, she was definitely sure that he was not a chosen from any of the other sects or clans. And yet, she could sense terrifying undulations coming off of him. Despite having a peak immortal realm cultivation, Li Linger had lasted less than half an incense stick's worth of time against Yifazi's divine abilities. She had immediately ended up in sore straits. Were it not for some of the life-saving techniques she had up her sleeves, she would already have perished. Who is this guy? She thought, biting her lip as a sense of deadly crisis filled her. You can't escape, said Zheng Linfa, licking some blood off of his hand. His eyes shone with a mysterious light and he wore a slight smile. He was in no hurry. After all, his Tao protector had said that killing this girl would end his trial by fire. Therefore, he wanted to enjoy himself for as long as possible. Even if things got somewhat out of control in the end, he wouldn't have to deal with the aftermath. His Tao protector would naturally take care of any difficulties that arose. In fact, as far as he was concerned, his Tao protector was actually being too cautious about everything. Doesn't matter that you're an immortal, Yifazi said, laughing. You should feel honored to be my prey. You can't even imagine my status where I come from. As he spoke, he clawed his right hand out in front of him. A boom could be heard as more of Li Linger's clothing was ripped away. The explosion of power was so intense that if she had been slower to avoid it, she would have been seriously injured. Despite avoiding the main blast, she still coughed up a mouthful of blood, and her face paled. Her aura was weakened even further, and her flame of life force seemed to be on the verge of being extinguished. He's not a cultivator from the Ninth Mountain and Sea, she thought, gritting her teeth. She had already sent a distress signal to the clan via Jade slip, and was confident that if she could only hold out for a bit longer, someone would come to rescue her. What are you running for? Said Yifazi. I remember you. You're Li Linger, right? You're not just any immortal, you're a true immortal. I've been practicing cultivation for years now, and I've never had the chance to taste the blood of an immortal. It turns out to be quite sweet. Laughing, he inhaled the fragrance of Li Linger's blood, and his eyes shone brightly. Oh, I get it. You're trying to buy time. You're waiting for someone to come from your clan and save you. Well, keep on waiting and see if someone comes. See if anyone got the message from your Jade slip. Yifazi waved a finger, causing a violent wind to spring up. Just as it seemed about to crush down onto Li Linger, a green light sprang up around her, filled with countless vines that blocked the wind. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the vines were shredded. Once again, Li Linger coughed up a mouthful of blood. Her vision swam, and through the pain, her eyes began to shine with despair. Based on how much time had passed, if the clan had received her message, then someone should have come already. Considering nobody was around, it proved that her opponent had definitely prepared well for this encounter. Don't worry, laughed Yifazi. I'll be gentle. Before you die, you'll serve me well, and then I'll gently rip your body apart piece by piece. I'll use your blood to consecrate my Taoist magic. Achieve the Tao by murdering an immortal. Seize your immortal body to become my foundation. Laughing, he closed in on Li Linger. It was at this point that a powerful roar echoed out through the starry sky, causing ripples to spread about everywhere. Meng Hao. The two words that comprised the roar echoed about, causing Li Linger's eyes to shine brilliantly. Instantly, she headed toward the source of the sound, gritting her teeth as she flew at top speed. She didn't hold anything back from her cultivation base. She unleashed secret magics and even burned her immortal meridians to achieve astonishing, temporary speed. In the blink of an eye, she had shot far off into the distance. Yifazi's face darkened. Inwardly, he was actually quite frightened. Although he didn't care about the words that were being roared, he couldn't ignore the fact that the roar itself contained an aura that was so frightening it made his scalp feel like it was about to explode. It was at this point that he heard his Tao protector's voice in his ear. I've already deployed cloaking magic. No more fooling around. End the battle and kill the immortal. As soon as your trial by fire baptism is complete, we will leave this realm. Euphazzi's eyes glittered. He didn't respond, but did increase his speed dramatically. In the blink of an eye, he transformed into a beam of prismatic light that shot in pursuit of Li Linger. Shocking killing intent rolled out from him. Gradually, a black, three-headed python appeared behind him. It roared, emanating a fiendish will that was completely different from anything in the 9 mountains and seas. That was like a paramount fiendishness of heaven and earth. A whistling sound echoed out, like that of an arrow piercing through the sky. Euphazzi sped closer and closer to Li Linger. After 10 breaths of time passed, the distance between him and Li Linger was reduced to only 300 meters. It was at this point that Li Linger caught sight of that land mass soaring through the stars. It was Patriarch Reliance, with Meng Hao sitting on his head drinking alcohol. "Meng Hao," she cried out as soon as she saw him. However, despite her loud cry, Meng Hao appeared to be ignoring her. "He can't see you," said Euphazzi, his voice cold. "If he could, then I wouldn't mind killing 2 immortals today." He waved his right hand toward Li Linger, causing more blood to spray from her mouth. She could also sense that despite the short distance between herself and Meng Hao, they seemed to be separated by some sort of illusory screen, making it impossible for him to see her. Euphazzi is too well prepared to be acting alone. He has to be working with someone. Well, since Meng Hao can't see me, then I'll just forget about it. Even if he could see, it would only drag him into this situation. How could I cause trouble for him too? Despite being filled with bitterness and despair, Li Linger's eyes gleamed with determination. Even as Euphazzi's hand strike closed in on her, she chose to detonate her immortal meridians. Booms could be heard as immortal meridians emerged from her body and transformed into immortal dragons, which then exploded. Blood sprayed from her mouth as the incredible power of the detonation caused her to shoot directly toward the ruins of immortality. I'll have a better chance of surviving in the ruins of immortality than in the hands of Euphazzi, she thought, flying into the ruins at incredible speed. Note from Deathblade. The following is a note Urgen included in the original release. Obviously, his release schedule back then doesn't affect the release schedule of the translation. Note from Urgen. I'd like to request 3 or 4 days off from everyone in the audience. During that time, I'll probably only be able to post 1 chapter per day, as I'm taking my daughter to the Beijing Children's Hospital to see the doctor. Recently, I've been very concerned because of my daughter being sick. I haven't said anything because I didn't really feel like talking about it. I hope that you can understand, brothers and sisters. Thank you. Chapter 10:21. Pursued into the ruins of immortality. Meng Hao waved his finger at Patriarch Reliance, causing him to suddenly stop. By this point, the turtle's discontent had reached the point of detonation, and he let out a mighty roar at Meng Hao. As for Meng Hao, he rose to his feet and looked curiously off into the distance toward the ruins of immortality. "Strange. I got a really weird feeling just now," he said. Although he wasn't sure what had caused it, he was sure that moments ago, something like a veil had passed in front of his eyes. It was as if there was something he should have seen that had been covered up. "What do you mean strange?" said Patriarch Reliance, sounding a bit arrogant. "A girl went by just now calling your name. You ignored her and she ran off into the ruins of immortality. Oh, there was some kid chasing her, looked like he was trying to kill her." Patriarch Reliance looked both disdainful and pleased with himself as he spoke. Meng Hao stared in shock. "Yeah, that's right," the parrot said, sounding surprised. "Lord Fifth saw it too. You mean you didn't see it?" "Lord Third saw it too," the meat jelly said, sounding very serious. "You really couldn't see it. Come on, stop faking. Faking is immoral. Faking is wrong." "I saw it too," said Guiding Trirane, covering a smile with her hand. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as he looked off into the starry sky. He glanced over at the ruins of immortality, muttering to himself. "All right," continued Patriarch Reliance. "Meng Hao, you little bastard, listen up. That kid just now said something like, since you didn't want to marry the girl, he was going to help fulfill your husbandly duties for you. You know, kids these days seem really kind-hearted, the type who really finds joy in helping others." He laughed loudly, seeming very pleased with himself. "Yeah, that's right. Lord Third also happens to think that kid is really kind-hearted. What a good person. There aren't many sincere people like that in the world. Such character and such morals are really worth imitating." The meat jelly nodded its head vigorously, clearly ignorant of the reality of the situation. The parrot rolled its eyes and then cleared its throat. Meng Hao, if you don't go save her right now, she'll truly become the plaything of that other guy. If Lord Fifth remembers correctly, that furless girl is named Li Linger. Meng Hao's face was now extremely unsightly as he stared off into the ruins of immortality, and his eyes flickered with killing intent. He wasn't sure why Li Linger wasn't back in the Li clan, but it didn't matter. Regardless of what issues the two of them had, he had no reason to leave her to die when he was in a position to save her. Furthermore, since her pursuer had mentioned something about fulfilling Meng Hao's husbandly duties, well, that was something that no true man would be able to accept. The matter of he and Li Linger getting married was a personal matter between the two of them. For someone to say something like that was an outrageous provocation. Glaring at the parrot and meat jelly, he gave a cold harumph, then lifted his foot and then stamped it down onto Patriarch Reliance. "All right, follow them into the ruins of immortality," he said, his voice cold but his heart filled with vigilance. He knew that whatever technique had been used to obscure his vision had been something completely terrifying. What was even more frightening was the fact that Li Linger was being hunted, and yet the Li clan hadn't sent anyone to rescue her. However, Meng Hao glanced at Patriarch Reliance and thought about how he had been unaffected when everyone else on planet East Victory had been knocked senseless. That showed how unbelievably powerful he must be in battle. Feeling excited, Patriarch Reliance changed directions and headed toward the ruins of immortality at top speed. The parrot was also getting excited. It had the feeling that ruins of immortality were filled with all sorts of furred and feathered beasts, which made it like the promised land of his dreams. As for the moronic meat jelly, it was easily convinced of anything in its simple-mindedness. Rumbling filled the air as Patriarch Reliance exploded with speed. In the blink of an eye, he was already in the ruins of immortality, speeding in pursuit of Li Linger. Patriarch Reliance was gargantuan, so as soon as he entered the ruins of immortality, everything began to tremble. It was as if the natural laws had been disturbed by his arrival and were now changing. Guiding Trirane trembled and her expression suddenly turned blank. For some reason, she suddenly felt like something was calling her, summoning her, to a place deep within the ruins of immortality. It was almost as if there were a forgotten portion of her memories that were suddenly unlocked as soon as she entered. As soon as the small group entered the ruins of immortality, the old man sitting in the ship outside of the ruins frowned. "It seems I underestimated that turtle, as well as that bird. I even underestimated that bell-like thing and the girl on top of the turtle." Earlier, he had recognized that Patriarch Reliance and the parrot were powerful, but now he had to admit that they were far more terrifying than he had assumed. "For them to be able to see through my Taoist magic," he muttered. It was something that completely exceeded what he had planned for. Originally, his surface plan had been to appear as if he was warning Yifazi, and yet surreptitiously provoke him into accosting Li Linger. Through the death of Li Linger, the Zhang clan of the Spirit Star realm would sow a seed with Meng Hao. The old man had very much been looking forward to seeing what type of flower would bloom as a result. But now, things were not going according to plan. Muttering to himself, he looked over at the ruins of immortality, and he seemed to be recalling something that filled him with deep fear. The paragon immortal realm of yesteryear, he thought. Memories swirled within him, and he sighed. Finally, he gritted his teeth and headed into the ruins of immortality. He had no choice. He could plot against the Zhang clan, but he definitely could not allow Yifazi to die in the ruins of immortality. Meng Hao stood on Patriarch Reliance's head, looking around as they sped through the ruins of immortality. This was his second time coming here, and things in this area looked much different than the entrance opened by the three great Taoist societies. The three great Taoist societies' entrance was an area that they had thoroughly explored, and they had taken steps to ensure that it was not dangerous. However, the current area Meng Hao was in was a place few people ever came to. Up ahead, numerous stone fragments hung in the air. There were also shattered statues visible, and the sky was covered with fissures that seemed capable of slicing up and swallowing anything and everything. There were even strange, demonic voices that echoed about in the air, along with an archaic, ancient aura. Furthermore, these were only the outskirts of the ruins of immortality. As they proceeded onward, Patriarch Reliance's expression grew more serious. However, he still seemed to charge forward with incredible power, blasting through any obstructions as if they were dried sticks. The strength of his fleshly body had reached a terrifying degree, allowing them to speed rapidly through the outer region of the ruins of immortality. Meng Hao's expression was grim as he rotated his cultivation base. 123 immortal meridians exploded with power, none of which seeped out of him. 33 blurry heavens descended, and the glitter of starlight appeared in his eyes. As he stood there, energy surging, he truly seemed to exude the will of the immortal realm paragon. I don't want the same thing that happened before to happen again, where you people can see what's happening and I can't, he suddenly announced coldly. He lifted his hand, and a fifth hex rift appeared. Patriarch Reliance muttered something to himself, then suddenly opened his mouth and roared. The roar did not spread out in all directions, but rather was confined to the rather small area around him. Open! Rumbling could be heard as everything around Meng Hao suddenly changed. He saw floating spatters of blood and other traces that someone was being viciously hunted down. In a location not too far away, Li Linger's face was pale white, and blood sprayed from her mouth. She was like an oil lamp on the verge of sputtering out, her life force at its limit. She had found no hope in the ruins of immortality, only despair, causing her to laugh bitterly. Yifazi and his black, three-headed python were right behind her. Everything trembled as a brutal aura spread out in all directions, causing ripples to surge out and push the nearby debris away. "Feeling hopeless, are we?" asked Yifazi, laughing. His eyes gleamed with an evil light as he raised his right hand. With the wave of a finger, he caused a black beam to shoot out. Everywhere it passed, rocks and canyons shattered into pieces. A boom could be heard, and blood sprayed out of Li Linger's mouth as she slammed down into a field of shattered rocks. She looked back, glaring at Yifazi without the slightest hint of defeat or compliance in her eyes. She might be in a hopeless situation, and she might be about to die, but she would perish with her dignity. "I love this kind of expression," exclaimed Yifazi. "Back home, all the trophy heads of the immortals killed by the patriarchs throughout history have this exact same expression." "Immortals." He threw his head back and laughed, and his expression was one of boundless arrogance. "Immortals must all die, and all immortal realms will be destroyed. Who gives a crap about the Paragon immortal realm and you crappy immortals?" Killing, intent flickering, Yifazi advanced toward Li Linger. He waved his right hand in a claw-like gesture, causing an enormous power to explode out. Li Linger was simply incapable of fighting back or struggling. Her eyes, however, shone with determination, as an aura of extermination suddenly surged up inside her. She had chosen to self-detonate. "Self-detonation," said Yifazi with a light smile. He quickly performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, unleashing some type of Taoist magic that caused Li Linger to tremble. Suddenly, the destructive aura within her dispersed. She was shocked to find that she couldn't self-detonate. "I learned this secret magic a long time ago to deal with immortals who try to self-detonate." Even as he spoke, Yifazi appeared in front of Li Linger, lifted his right hand up and clutched her by the neck. Then he shoved her down onto the ground. His expression vile, he smiled and said, "All right, be a good girl and allow me to consummate our marriage. After that, I'll use your blood for my baptism." Li Linger was trembling, and she bit her lip as she stared back at Yifazi. It was at this point that suddenly, she opened her mouth, causing a brilliant light to shoot out. Yifazi was shocked. At the same time, glittering light suddenly rose up around him. The beam of light flashed past his neck. It was a dangerously sharp willow leaf that had come dangerously close to slitting his throat. "Slut," he roared. Inwardly, he was shocked. Without the life-saving shield provided by his clan, that willow leaf would most likely have taken his head off. Enraged, he was just about to reach in and rip Li Linger's tongue out when, all of a sudden, a coldness caused him to look up and off into the distance. What he saw was Patriarch Reliance's massive frame rushing toward him, atop whom stood Meng Hao, staring coldly in his direction. Note from Deathblade. Just a reminder that the following note is from Urgen, not ME. Note from Urgen. Thank you everyone for your concern regarding my daughter. Thank you for your support, brothers and sisters. Thank you. We have an appointment this afternoon at the hospital and are leaving right now. Again, thank you. Chapter 10:22, Pipe Down. Killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes, and fury raged in his heart. There was no major enmity between him and Li Linger, just the normal competition that occurred between cultivators. Regarding the matter of the marriage agreement, that was something that had been decided years ago. Although Meng Hao had fled the marriage, that didn't mean that he was willing to stand idly by while Li Linger faced grave danger. That was especially so in a situation like this, in which her aura was extremely weak. Before, she had been as proud as the heavens, but now she was gasping her last breaths. Meng Hao's fury burned like endless flames. Li Linger had been filled with despair and wanted to die. But when she saw Meng Hao, all of a sudden, a faint glow of hope appeared in her eyes. Meng Hao's arrival was something she could never have predicted. In the instant she saw him, her desire to live was immediately rekindled. "It's you. Can you actually see me?" Yifazi stared in shock for a moment, and then a wicked smile spread out on his face as if he couldn't care less about Meng Hao. Suddenly, he lifted his right hand, clenched it into a fist, and punched out toward Li Linger's delicate head. He wanted to kill Li Linger right in front of Meng Hao. However, in that instant, the lightning cauldron suddenly appeared in Meng Hao's hand. It danced with electricity, and rumbling filled the void as he instantly switched positions with Li Linger. Not even Yifazi had time to react. All of a sudden, Li Linger appeared on top of Patriarch Reliance, after which guiding Trirane knelt down, put her hand on her forehead, and began to treat her injuries. As for Meng Hao, as soon as he appeared in the position previously occupied by Li Linger, he saw Yifazi's fist plummeting toward him. Without a moment's hesitation, he rotated his cultivation base, causing the explosive power of 123 immortal meridians to surge. 33 heavens descended with terrifying power. All of it was focused directly on Yifazi. Rumbling echoed out, and Yifazi's face fell. He jerked back, evading Meng Hao's attack, his fist transforming into a sealing incantation as he pointed toward Meng Hao. Instantly, the black, three-headed python behind him roared and then shot toward Meng Hao as if to consume him. "I'm glad you showed up," he laughed. "I originally wanted to use you for my baptism, so guess what? A year from today will be your first memorial service." Yifazi threw his head back and laughed. His expression was one of rapture as he waved his hand, causing the black, three-headed python to grow rapidly. Rumbling sounds echoed out as it charged toward Meng Hao. "He's not from the 9th mountain and sea," Li Linger cried weakly, her face ashen. Despite the healing from guiding Trirane, Li Linger was still quite weak. As for Patriarch Reliance, he remained off to the side, eyes shifting back and forth. Naturally, he was not assisting. In fact, he was even contemplating the fact that if Meng Hao died, he would finally be free. He was about to slip away quietly when Meng Hao waved his hand, causing a 5th hex rift to appear and slowly circle around Patriarch Reliance's head. Patriarch Reliance was so frightened he started trembling and didn't dare to move an inch. As for Meng Hao, his eyes flickered with killing intent. As soon as he heard Li Linger's words, he looked at Yifazi, and his eyes began to glitter brightly. He performed an incantation gesture with his left hand and then pointed out. Instantly, a blood demon head materialized, roaring. It wasn't just a single head, but 123 of them. They attacked, unleashing all of Meng Hao's power. The 123 blood demon heads instantly merged together, turning into an even larger blood demon head, which then shot toward the black, three-headed python. The two slammed into each other in midair, causing a huge boom, along with a massive gust of wind that blasted out in all directions. Meng Hao didn't back up, but instead advanced, appearing directly in front of Yifazi and then punching out. That one punch was filled with Meng Hao's internal immortal power, as well as all of his true immortal fleshly body strength. Its force was comparable to a powerful magic and contained incredible destructive power. Dust flew up in all directions and the void shattered. Yifazi's eyes went wide, and an intense sensation of deadly crisis shook him. He had known that Meng Hao was powerful, but now he discovered exactly how powerful. In that moment of crisis, Yifazi threw his head back and roared, then performed a double-handed incantation gesture. Instantly, light flowed out across his body in the shape of a suit of armor. The armor was golden and radiated boundless light that made him seem even more like a true immortal than Meng Hao. Meng Hao's fist rumbled as it slammed into Yifazi in his suit of armor. Instantly, cracks spread out across the armor, and Yifazi was sent flying backward. However, in almost the same instant that the cracks spread out across the armor, they repaired themselves. Apparently, the power of Meng Hao's one punch couldn't harm Yifazi at all. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with coldness. Yifazi laughed arrogantly and then said, "Meng Hao, right? A true immortal, right? Well, so what? You can't even break open my true plate armor. What makes you think you have anything powerful enough to fight me with?" "Immortal, this is a so-called immortal. Bring out some of that awe-inspiring immortal stuff they used to have back in the day, and let me see it. Let me see what an immortal is supposed to be." As Yifazi laughed, Meng Hao stared in shock at what was being said, completely unable to make heads nor tails of what Yifazi was talking about. "You don't understand. You do comprehend. Oh, I get it. To you people, all of these things are considered a big secret. People like you still don't qualify to know the truth. When Yifazi saw Meng Hao's expression, he began to laugh maniacally. Pipe down, Meng Hao said coolly. He suddenly flickered, transforming into a huge golden rock that shot toward Yifazi with incredible speed. He was on him in the blink of an eye, razor-sharp talons slashing out. Yifazi laughed coldly and waved his hand to summon a magical technique. Shockingly, a black, nine-headed python materialized around him, which roared and charged toward Meng Hao. At the same time, a magical symbol appeared in each of Yifazi's eyes, as well as on his forehead. The three magical symbols merged together, transforming into a spell formation that also shot toward Meng Hao. Rumbling filled the void as Meng Hao slashed apart the black python and beat his wings in the direction of the incoming spell formation. Suddenly, innumerable mountains appeared, which linked together into chains of mountains that resembled numerous gigantic dragons. Booms rang out as, in a relatively short period of time, dozens of attacks were exchanged. Every time any of Meng Hao's divine abilities landed on Yifazi, however, his brilliant armor would block the attack. A ruthless gleam appeared in Meng Hao's eyes as he took a step forward. Immortal dragons roared as they shot toward Yifazi. Booms rang out, and the ground of the ruins of immortality quaked. Countless nearby statues and other ruins were shoved backward. Yifazi's face flickered slightly, and he suddenly fell back. At the same time, though, he called out, "Heaven, master of mortals. Hell, master of heaven. Lin, master of hell. 1. This passage, Heaven, master of mortals. Hell, master of heaven. Lin, master of hell, was really a headache to translate, as it's a twist on a passage from famous Chinese philosopher Laozi. Thanks to RWX for helping out. Also, there is a big clue Easter egg about the ISSTH universe in here. Because it's a bit more vague and open to interpretation in Chinese, it was a subject of speculation among the Chinese fans when this chapter first came out, and was not specifically explained by Jin, so I'll let you guys have fun guessing about it. Yifazi's hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, causing strange ripples to spread out across his body. Shockingly, two enormous black wings sprouted from his back, which emanated a strange glow. They seemed to fuse with the void around him, causing him to look bizarre to the extreme. At the same time, a huge black bow appeared in his hands. 3 masters exterminate immortals. As soon as the words left his mouth, countless magical symbols appeared on his glowing armor, which merged together to form an arrow. The bow was drawn, the arrow flew. The void vibrated so violently it shattered. The powerful arrow ripped through the starry sky toward Meng Hao. Seeing the arrow close in on Meng Hao caused Li Linger to get very nervous. However, there was nothing she could do to help. As for the parrot and meat jelly and patriarch Reliance, they didn't seem concerned at all. Meng Hao snorted coldly and extended his right hand, within which appeared a long spear. It had a white spearhead, and the shaft was made from the world tree. As soon as it appeared, strange colors flashed, and boundless ripples spread out which seemed to stir the entire ruins of immortality. Meng Hao hurled the spear out, causing massive rumbling to fill the starry sky. The spear shot through the void like a white dragon, both projectiles so fast that ring-like shockwaves were formed in the void through which they traveled. In the blink of an eye they were upon each other, and as they made contact, a terrifyingly loud boom blasted out in all directions. Meng Hao, is this your true power? None of your attacks have even been able to break through my armor. Is this really the power of a true immortal? Almost in the same moment that the spear and arrow slammed into each other, Meng Hao took a step forward. Watch and see how I break it, he said coolly. When he took his first step, he waved his right index finger, causing boundless light to shoot up into the starry sky. In the blink of an eye, the light formed into a fist-sized globe of light. It was the sun. As soon as the sun appeared, shocking ripples spread out. However, Yifazi continued to laugh coldly, as if he didn't care at all about the sun. He didn't retreat at all, but instead advanced and even revealed a second bow and arrow. At the same time, Meng Hao took a second step and waved his right hand again, causing the image of another shocking heavenly body to appear next to the sun. It was the moon. The sun and the moon began to orbit each other, causing a massive energy to explode out. Yifazi's eyes widened, and in that same moment, Meng Hao took a third step. As he stepped forward, he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out. Shockingly, the illusory image of a mountain appeared between the sun and the moon. It was the projection of the 9th mountain. The sun and moon orbiting the 9th mountain. Massive energy soared up, causing Yifazi's face to fall completely. All of a sudden, a sensation of indescribable crisis filled him, and instead of advancing, he began to back up. However, in the moment that he stepped back, Meng Hao took a fourth step. With that fourth step, he waved his sleeve. Rumbling filled the void as a black pearl and a white pearl appeared and began to circulate around the ninth mountain and the sun and the moon. Terrifying undulations caused Yifazi's eyes to widen, and he fell into shocked retreat. Magical technique combination. That's a complex type of magic that only almighty experts can control. How are you doing this? Even as Yifazi spoke, killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes. He waved his right hand, and the sun, moon, and black-white pearls continued to orbit around the ninth mountain as it shot toward Yifazi with incredible speed. The speed was such that Yifazi was incapable of evading. Gritting his teeth, he roared and performed a double-handed incantation gesture, then pushed his hand out in front of him. The glowing armor immediately began to emanate blinding light as he used all the power he could muster to block the attack. Rumbling echoed out in all directions. The sun and moon collapsed and the ninth mountain shattered. The black-white pearls dissipated. However, in that same moment, all of Yifazi's glowing armor shattered, layer by layer. Yifazi coughed up a massive mouthful of blood, and alarm filled his face. Just when he was about to fall back at full speed, Meng Hao took a fifth step, his face filled with savagery and the desire to kill. It was in that very moment that an ancient voice echoed out like thunder from further back. "Stay your hand." The parrot blinked and its feathers stood on end. The meat jelly began to tremble, and Patriarch Reliance turned his head, his expression one of unprecedented solemnity. /expand. A strange cultivator was almost able to hunt Li Linger down and kill her. Unexpectedly, no one from the Li clan showed up to stop it from happening. The situation seemed very strange, especially considering that the Li clan was not very far away on planet North Reed. In the ninth mountain and sea, inquiries were rarely made when ordinary cultivators fought and killed another. However, when a chosen died or was injured, it was always a big matter. Very few people would actually employ deadly force against a chosen, mostly because of the numerous ramifications that would be involved. However, this strange cultivator clearly wanted to kill Li Linger. Most importantly, Meng Hao's vision had been interfered with moments ago so that he couldn't see what was happening. Clearly, this strange cultivator was not working alone. He definitely had some almighty expert hiding in the shadows, assisting him. Meng Hao had already reached such a conclusion before coming to rescue Li Linger. In the end, he decided that it didn't matter, he had to rescue her anyway. Therefore, when he heard someone crying out to prevent him from landing his deadly attack on the young man, he didn't hesitate for even a moment to cry out, "Patriarch Reliance, block that man's path for a quarter of an hour, and I'll give you 100 years of freedom." This was only the third time he had spoken in the entire battle. At first, Patriarch Reliance was infuriated, and he was of a mind to ignore a mere 100 years of freedom. But as he thought about it, he realized that if Meng Hao had said he would give a lifetime of freedom, it would have been completely unbelievable. But if it was only 100 years, it actually seemed a lot more plausible. "Fudge," he cried. Eyes gleaming with savagery, he suddenly lifted his head and looked at the incoming old man, then roared. At the same time as he let out that intense roar, black light flashed around him as he shot toward the old man. That old man was none other than the person who had been accompanying Yifazi the entire time, his Tao protector. When he saw Patriarch Reliance bearing down on him, his eyes widened with fear. Not quite sure what to make of him, he waved his hand, causing an enormous, illusory creature to appear that resembled a tadpole. It was pitch black and had no eyes, only a gaping mouth. As soon as it appeared, it opened its mouth wide and lunged toward Patriarch Reliance as if to swallow him. "Fudgetastic magical super-attack," Patriarch Reliance roared, shouting as he barreled forward. Even as the words left his mouth, he was taken aback and wondered why he had said that in particular. However, it actually seemed quite appropriate. Rumbling filled the air as Patriarch Reliance exploded with all of his power. Normally speaking, that in and of itself wouldn't have caused the old man to pause. However, it was at this point that the old man noticed numerous beams of light radiating off of Patriarch Reliance. Instantly, his face fell, as if he had just remembered something. He appeared to be both shocked and terrified of the beams of light, and did everything he could to avoid them. As a result, he could proceed no further. Meng Hao didn't even look back, nor did he slow down. In the blink of an eye, he was upon Yifazi. He clenched his fist, his eyes flickering with killing intent, and then began to punch, intent on completely destroying the defenseless Yifazi. Yifazi's heart was pounding. In his own realm, he had an incredibly high position. Were that not the case, he would never have qualified to come to the Ninth Mountain and see for a trial by fire, let alone have a Tao protector to guard him. However, his experience couldn't possibly compare to Meng Hao's, nor was he a match for him in terms of viciousness. Yifazi couldn't imagine all of the various things that Meng Hao had experienced. In this moment of critical danger, Yifazi's expression suddenly turned to one of madness. He bit down on the tip of his tongue, then spit out a mouthful of blood, which transformed into a huge, blood-colored lake that spun toward Meng Hao. When the lake came into contact with Meng Hao's fist, it simply evaporated, turning into a blood-colored mist that quickly faded away. As for the fist, it passed directly through the mist to slam into Yifazi's chest. A massive boom rang out, accompanied by cracking sounds. Blood sprayed out of Yifazi's mouth as his chest caved in. As he flopped backward, he felt as if there were 123 bursts of energy exploding within him. In the blink of an eye, he exploded. However, after he exploded, Meng Hao frowned as he saw all of the bits of blood and gore form back together in midair. Terrifying ripples of power exploded out. Meng Hao, I'm gonna kill you, kill you. You destroyed my favorite magical body. I'm going to take you and refine you into a new magical body for myself. Meng Hao, I want you dead, dead, dead. Howls that seemed to originate from hell itself rang out from the reforming body, filled with boundless rancor and insanity. As the words echoed out, the shattered flesh rapidly congealed back together, materializing into something that didn't look like Yifazi had moments ago, but rather a three-headed creature with a long, undulating tail. It looked like neither a human nor a demon. The first head looked like Yifazi's, the second was half python, half human, vicious and fierce. The third head was completely snake-like, complete with a flicking, forked tongue. Meng Hao, he cried in a shocking, piercing voice. I'm gonna tear you to shreds. I'll baptize myself in your blood to complete my immortal foundation. When Meng Hao saw the reformed Yifazi, his eyes widened. Li Linger also saw him, and her heart began to thump. Meng Hao's mind thrummed as he looked at Yifazi. He had never seen any entity such as this before. He had seen demons, things like mountains or rivers personified, but those were true greater demons. But he had never seen anything at all that looked like this. It was like a beast but not, like a cultivator but not. Even more shocking, Meng Hao realized that the demon sealing Jade in his bag of holding was suddenly vibrating at a frequency unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Those vibrations even exceeded what he had felt when he had acquired the fifth hex, or when he had encountered the sixth-generation demon sealer. It was as if an enmity and hatred that could not be wiped away with the passage of time was suddenly exploding out from the demon sealing Jade with incredible intensity. A lower realms rebel, bloodline of the Zhang clan. When we demon sealers encounter someone like this, he must die. Die, 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 die. Meng Hao's mind rumbled with the ancient voice of the demon sealing Jade. An intense murderous aura erupted out from his demon sealer immortal meridian, which immediately began to rotate. Apparently, if Meng Hao did not slaughter this so-called lower realms rebel, then his demon sealer immortal meridian would no longer approve of him. This was an intense madness, and hatred that Meng Hao had never felt before in his entire life. Almost as soon as Yifazi's true appearance was made manifest, the old man who was tangled up with Patriarch Reliance suddenly went berserk. Fool, imbecile, why you? Damn it, you already lost. Why didn't you just go back right away? Why would you possibly be so idiotic as to reveal your true form here? Damn it, you people from the Zhang clan are all morons. He appeared to be completely enraged and was trembling all over. In addition to the rage on his face, there was also terror and anxiety. It was as if Yifazi revealing this form would cause a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering catastrophe. In the same moment that Yifazi revealed his body, a howl could be heard coming from the Jai clan's ancestral mansion on the Ninth Mountain. That howl instantly echoed out to fill the entire Ninth Mountain and sea. Not everyone could hear it, though. Only Tao Realm experts were able to detect the shrill and abrupt call. It was a sound that hadn't been heard for a very, very long time. The shocking cry caused the faces, all of the Tao Realm patriarchs in the Ninth Mountain and sea to flicker. That was especially true of the three great Taoist societies. Instantly, all of their Tao Realm experts flew out, their faces serious and even nervous. The entire Jai clan on the Ninth Mountain was equally shaken. Their Dao realm experts began to pant as they charged out toward the rear of the Jai clan ancestral mansion, where, at the peak of the Ninth Mountain, was a celestial pond. Its waters were as clear as glass and were covered by wisps of white mist. However, at the bottom of the pond, 9 bronze cauldrons were visible. Each of the cauldrons emanated an air of extreme ancientness, as if they had existed within the stream of time for an indescribable length of time. In the center of the 9 cauldrons, shockingly, was an enormous Qianwu turtle. That Qianwu turtle and those 9 cauldrons were not items that belonged to the Jai clan. In fact, you could say that they did not belong to any clan or sect at all. They belonged to the Ninth Mountain. Any clan or sect who became the lord of the Ninth Mountain and sea would have control of them. The Qianwu turtle's back bristled with sharp spikes, each one of which was covered by countless magical symbols. It looked incredibly fierce as it sat there, its back just barely protruding out of the water. For years, it had remained in that exact position, unmoving as if it were a statue. However, moments ago, the gigantic Qianwu turtle had suddenly moved. A tremor ran through it as it rose up and howled, a terrifying howl that echoed out into the starry sky. Everything shook and the pond water seethed. The 9 cauldrons began to shake. The Dao realm experts of the Jai clan were all getting incredibly nervous. They looked at the howling Qianwu turtle and their faces fell. The howl seemed to indicate that the Qianwu turtle was enduring indescribable pain. What happened? Why is the Qianwu turtle howling as if in pain? Could it be that someone has made an incursion into our Jai clan? No, I don't think so. Now that I think about it, there's a legend in the Ninth Mountain. Even as the Dao realm experts were quivering in shock, suddenly, an enormous eye appeared in the sky above the Ninth Mountain. Within that eye could just barely be seen the image of an old man sitting, cross-legged in meditation. In the instant the eye appeared, the entire Ninth Mountain and sea trembled. An ancient voice suddenly echoed out from within the eye. Outsiders have entered the Ninth Mountain and sea. Comply with the ancient treaty of the Mountain and Sea Realm Alliance. Slaughter the outsiders. Chapter 10:23. The Mountain and Sea Realm Alliance. Note from Deathblade. The following is Urgen's note, not mine. Note from Urgen. If all goes as planned, I'll return home tonight. However, my daughter's tests at the hospital haven't been finished. There are still some more things that need to be checked out. However, unless something unforeseen happens, I'll be home tomorrow night, which means I'll return to my normal schedule the day after. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can understand. /expand. Almost as soon as the sound echoed out, all of the Dao realm experts in the Ninth Mountain and sea were shaken. At the same time, a shocking image appeared in their minds. It was an image of the general location, Menghao currently occupied in the ruins of immortality. Obviously, the image was a form of guidance, telling the Dao realm experts that the outsiders were in the ruins of immortality. In the blink of an eye, roughly half of the Dao realm experts suddenly stepped out into the starry sky and began to speed in that direction. Fang Xiaodao was one of them. He and the experts from the 3 great Taoist societies were among the first to head toward the ruins of immortality. On planet North Reed, the Patriarch and others from the Li clan also headed in the direction of the location of the image they had seen. This sudden turn of events shocked them all to the core and was clearly not a plot by the Jai clan. This matter was momentous. Not even the Jai clan would have the gall to scheme in this way. At the same moment in which the Dao realm experts employed their top speed to head toward the ruins of immortality, the old man who was facing off with Patriarch Reliance felt his scalp go numb and his face go pale. He was well aware of the danger they were now in because of Yifazi revealing his true form. Moron, imbecile, the old man raged inwardly. Accursed, heaven-damned Zheng clan, you were all like this back then and now this kid is the same. Fool, moron. At the same time, he was extremely apprehensive and nervous. He knew all too well what would happen after Yifazi revealed his true form. He also knew that even though only 9 mountains remained of the immortal world, and that it was no longer the grand entity which ruled over 3,000 lower realms. Even still, the Paragon Immortal Realm still held powerful entities that caused his scalp to go numb. The old man was also well aware of the deep-seated and complex hatred that the people from the Paragon Immortal Realm harbored against the other 2 major forces from that ancient war. However, even more importantly, he knew that what the Paragon Immortal Realm hated more than anything else was not those 2 other powers, but rather all of the lower realms which rebelled against the immortal world in the war. The spirit star realm was one of those lower realms. The old man gnashed his teeth and completely ignored Euphazzi. He backed up rapidly, waving his hand to cause the ship to appear. As soon as he set foot inside, he turned the ship around and began to flee. He intended to employ the fastest speed possible to escape from this world before any of the other cultivators from the Ninth Mountain and Sea could react to his presence. Based on the level of his cultivation base, he could already sense the auras of numerous powerful experts flying in his direction. Those people he could afford to ignore. However, he could also sense that somewhere out there, there was an even more fearsome existence that permeated the entire Ninth Mountain and Sea. The Lord of the Ninth Mountain and Sea, Jade. That moron Euphazzi really screwed things up this time. The old man's face was grim, and he gritted his teeth as he sent the ship flying forward. Then he bit the tip of his tongue, then spit out some blood, even burning some of his longevity to achieve a temporary burst of speed. He ripped through the starry sky at incredible speed, piercing out into the void. In a flash, he was on the verge of merging into the void itself. It was at this point that, deep within the ruins of immortality, in what seemed to be an ordinary immortal's cave, a white-robed woman sat cross-legged in meditation. She slowly opened her eyes, and they glinted with icy cold light. It was a coldness that encompassed hatred, rage, and the desire to kill. She slowly lifted her right hand and waved her finger toward the void. That finger caused an illusory thread to snake out into the distance. In the blink of an eye, it pierced through the entire ruins of immortality, slashing through the void toward the old man and his ship. The old man hadn't noticed anything strange happening and was just on the verge of disappearing when all of a sudden his face fell. He was about to turn to look behind him when his head flew off of his shoulders and blood sprayed up like a geyser. The thread, like a long strand of hair, flashed past and then disappeared without a trace. The old man's eyes went wide and his head tumbled through the void, causing his view of the world around him to spin about. He was baffled about what had happened until the moment he died, when he suddenly realized the truth. Gone. The old man's head transformed into ash along with his body. The ship was now no longer capable of merging into the void and gradually became visible again. Patriarch Reliance glanced at it and then gobbled it up. After he swallowed it, a tremor ran through him. He looked at the vanishing strand of hair, then peered deep into the ruins of immortality, his expression somewhat blank. He suddenly seemed to have recalled something important from the distant past, but no matter how much he tried to think about it, everything was vague and blurry. Meng Hao also saw the old man die, and his heart trembled. Then he looked into the depths of the ruins of immortality and recalled that woman in the white robes. When Euphazzi saw his Tao protector die, his scalp went numb, his mind filled with roaring, and his expression was one of fear. He had never had any sense of awe regarding the 9 mountains and seas, but now, he was absolutely terrified. What power was that? It actually killed my Tao protector in one blow. Euphazzi was panting, and his eyes were wide as his heart pounded loudly. All of a sudden, numerous legends regarding this place began to rise up in his mind. He began to shiver and slowly backed up. The only thing on his mind now was to flee. All of his surging power and momentum from before now collapsed and faded away. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. For the moment, he didn't even think about Li Linger. Considering Euphazzi's true form, as well as the words which had just been spoken, along with the intense killing intent from the demon sealing Jade, there was no way Meng Hao was going to allow him to get away. There were too many things he wanted to know, answers that Euphazzi could provide. Meng Hao didn't even pay attention to the opportunity Patriarch Reliance now had to escape. He instantly flashed through the air in pursuit of Euphazzi. Now that Euphazzi had changed form, he had experienced an increase in both cultivation base and speed. In a short moment, he was quite a distance away. Rumbling filled the air as he also sped away at top speed. He was scared, and the main thing he was concerned about was escaping Meng Hao. Then he would find a secluded place where he could figure out a way to return home. At the moment, he had no idea how he would do that. However, his Tao protector was dead, and he had no desire to end up the same. Trembling, he screamed inwardly. Dad will definitely sense that my Tao protector is dead. He'll come save me. All I have to do is find a place to hide, and Dad will eventually find me. Damned immortal world. Screw this place. Why couldn't it have been completely destroyed all those years ago? And then there's that damned Meng Hao. I'm not such a bad guy. Why does he have to push things so far? Cursing inwardly, Euphazzi increased his speed. Meng Hao chased him, and the two of them proceeded deeper into the ruins of immortality. Patriarch Reliance blinked a few times. Looking enraged, he made to follow Meng Hao, but actually flew slower and slower. At the same time, his voice grew louder and louder. "Stop running. The Patriarch is definitely going to catch you." "Still running? You're really pissing me off. I'm gonna chase you down with all my might." "I'm mad as hell now." As he roared, Patriarch Reliance's beady eyes darted back and forth. Eventually, Meng Hao disappeared off into the distance, whereupon Patriarch Reliance did an about-face, employing his top speed to flee in a different direction. The parrot and meat jelly were still on top of him, as was Li Linger. They watched in shock as Patriarch Reliance took to flight. After a few breaths of time, Patriarch Reliance used some unknown method to appear in another area of the ruins of immortality. Then, he shook the continent on his back, causing the parrot and meat jelly, as well as Li Linger, to be flung off of him. "Screw off," he roared. "From here on out the Patriarch is footloose and fancy-free. Ha ha ha, yet again the Patriarch is the smartest of all. He knows how to take advantage of all opportunities." "Meng Hao, you little bastard, you just wait. Our business isn't finished. I hereby swear that this time, you'll never find me, you son of a biscuit." Patriarch Reliance was virtually dancing about. He threw his head back and roared. Having tossed Li Linger, the parrot, and the meat jelly aside, he then sped off into the distance. Meanwhile, in another location in the ruins of immortality, Meng Hao's killing intent raged into the heavens. His cultivation base exploded with power, and the 33 heavens surrounded him. However, Yifazi was moving with incredible speed. Although they were able to fight back and forth a bit, Yifazi never slowed down. Nevertheless, under the relentless pursuit, his injuries began to accumulate. Even so, he used some unknown secret magic that eventually caused his speed to accelerate explosively. There were even many points where he was about to shake Meng Hao off his trail. However, each time Meng Hao was also able to use the 8th demon sealing hex to continuously break his momentum and allow him to make up for lost ground. Several days of chasing went by. Eventually, they reached an area where a gargantuan floating head rose up just ahead of them. The head had eyes that looked like black holes, as if someone had dug the eyeballs out in years past. Although it was a complete head, there was actually a huge fissure which split it from the crown of the head down. Also, a miserable and ancient will seeped out from inside of the head. As the head neared, an incredible pressure weighed down, forcing Yifazi to slow down. When that happened, his face fell. It was in that instant that Meng Hao closed in from behind. Lifting his hand, he unleashed the 8th demon sealing hex. As soon as he waved his finger, Yifazi's body trembled. Not good. At the same time, killing intent erupted in Meng Hao's eyes. He raised his right hand, causing the star-plucking magic to grab toward Yifazi. Yifazi threw his head back and howled. Innumerable beams of black light began to emanate off of him, transforming into countless black bats which then shot madly toward Meng Hao. Rumbling could be heard as Yifazi borrowed the force of the collision and once again shot forward. He was just on the verge of evading the star-plucking magic when Meng Hao's hand grabbed onto his wings. He wrenched viciously, and Yifazi let out a miserable shriek as the wings were ripped off of him. Blood sprayed out of the wounds, and Yifazi's face went ashen. He staggered backward, gritting his teeth and speeding away. Meng Hao's killing intent hadn't lessened in the least. The demon sealing Jade was vibrating more madly than ever as he put the severed wings into his bag of holding. Eyes shining as cold as knives, he once again gave chase. It was at this same time that the Tao Realm experts began to enter the ruins of immortality and search for the outsiders. The shrill cry of the Xianxia turtle continued to echo out. Until all the outsiders were dead, it would never return to sleep. Chapter 10:24. A Paragon Slaughters a Tao Protector. /expand. The Xianxia turtle's intense cry echoed out through the 9th mountain and sea into the ears of all individuals qualified to hear it. As the Tao Realm experts entered the ruins of immortality, a towering killing intent continued to surge through the 9th mountain and sea. Kill the outsiders. That was the will of the mountain and sea realm. Although Meng Hao could not hear the cry of the Xianxia turtle, the demon sealing Jade inside of his bag of holding was vibrating with unprecedented intensity. It emanated a fervent hatred that merged into Meng Hao. It was as if the League of Demon Sealers harbored infinite detestation towards all of these so-called outsiders, a hatred so fierce that it could only be sated by killing any of them that he met. Meng Hao was the 9th-generation demon sealer, so the feeling was almost overwhelming. However, even without the urging of the demon sealing Jade, Meng Hao would still have chosen to kill Yifazi. Naturally, the way that Yifazi had provoked him and had acted completely shamelessly ensured that Meng Hao would never let him go. Yifazi immediately fell back. Waving his hand, he caused the numerous black bats which had appeared moments ago to fill the sky and then descend onto Meng Hao in an attempt to halt his progress. Meng Hao snorted coldly and performed an incantation gesture with his right hand. Suddenly, a blood demon head appeared, so huge that it completely covered Meng Hao. It shot forward, slamming into the bats, causing miserable shrieks to ring out. In the blink of an eye, the blood demon head caused a red glow to spread out, which consumed the bats. Meng Hao turned into a red beam of blinding light, which pierced through the void of the ruins of immortality, pursuing Yifazi relentlessly. Yifazi's pale face was filled with an expression of terror and shock. He had known Meng Hao to be powerful, but this strength had surpassed anything he could have imagined. Damn it, damn it! Yifazi had long since realized that despite revealing his true self, he was still no match for Meng Hao. His time was up and he couldn't afford to get bogged down here. His Tao protector was dead, leaving him trembling in fear. He knew that if he was incapable of shaking off Meng Hao's pursuit, then the only thing that awaited him was death. To be killed in body and soul. Yifazi threw his head back and roared. His eyes were bright red, and although his wings had been ripped off, he still had 3 heads left. As the heads roared, black rings of light shot out from their foreheads. 3 rings of light emanated mysterious glows as he jerked his heads, transforming into light beams that shot toward Meng Hao. Life Force Light, he cried, performing an incantation gesture, his eyes shining with madness. As soon as the 3 black beams of light appeared, the flicker of electricity could be seen in Meng Hao's right hand. The lightning cauldron flickered, and in the same moment that the black beams bore down on him, he looked over at Yifazi and suddenly, the 2 of them switched places. Yifazi had no idea what was happening. The beams of light screeched to a stop right in front of Yifazi, causing his scalp to go numb. He could do nothing but stare in shock as Meng Hao waved his hand, causing tens of thousands of mountains to appear, which rumbled as they smashed down onto Yifazi. Meng Hao, he howled, if you let me go, then I, Yifazi, will owe you a huge favor. He performed a double-handed incantation gesture, then stretched both hands out wide. Immediately, the 3 beams of black light twisted around, transforming into a black tempest that fought back against the tens of thousands of mountains. At the same time, Yifazi spun, changing directions and shooting off like lightning. Meng Hao didn't say a word. When he saw Yifazi changing directions, his eyes glittered and the lightning cauldron once again appeared. Electricity danced, and yet black light surrounded Yifazi, fighting back against the transposition power. In a rare turn of events, the lightning cauldron failed. Said Meng Hao. Yifazi then exploded with speed, transforming into a colorful streak of light that immediately sped off into the surrounding ruins and corpses floating around this part of the ruins of immortality. Meng Hao gave a cold harumph, waving his right hand and pointing toward the fleeing Yifazi. Paragon Bridge. As soon as the words left Meng Hao's mouth, rumbling filled the air. A heaven-shaking, earth-rocking bridge suddenly appeared. As it rumbled down into the ruins of immortality, boundless ripples spread out, blocking Yifazi's path. Yifazi was thoroughly and completely shocked, and he suddenly stopped in place. Even the mere ripples caused him to cough up a massive mouthful of blood. A look of madness filled his face. Meng Hao, he let out a shrill cry, gnashing his teeth as he performed another incantation gesture. Black light flickered around him, and his 3 heads all screamed something like a magic curse. Behind him, a gigantic illusory statue appeared. Shockingly, the statue depicted an enormous black python. As soon as it appeared, it emanated a terrifying aura. Apparently, this entity was some sort of spirit that had existed in this realm in previous times. The sense of ancientness it exuded was shocking, and caused the ruins of immortality to tremble. Gradually, a murderous aura built up and then exploded out from the statue. "Ancestor, I humbly request your presence," roared Yifazi. The statue rumbled, and as it grew more and more corporeal, it opened its mouth and lashed out toward the Paragon Bridge. A boom could be heard, and the Paragon Bridge trembled and collapsed. In that same moment, though, the illusory python statue was also shattered. A massive shock wave spread out in all directions, causing innumerable ruins and corpses to be blasted away. Meng Hao was forced backwards several paces, his face flickering in shock. Blood sprayed out of Yifazi's mouth, and his eyes shone with madness. The python statue might have been destroyed, but Yifazi was now surrounded by a gigantic stone egg that completely covered him up as he shot into the distance like a meteor. His current speed was several times faster than his speed from moments ago. Just when he seemed on the verge of disappearing, Meng Hao's killing intent flared. The starstone in his left eye flickered and reappeared in his palm. It then melted into starlight, which rapidly surrounded Meng Hao as he transformed into a planet. As soon as the planet appeared, it sped through the void with vastly greater speed than Meng Hao had used before. It crushed everything in its path, and its surging energy caused everything to shake violently. Faster and faster, closer and closer to Yifazi. As for Yifazi himself, the pressure weighing down on him reduced his own speed. In the space of only 10 breaths of time, Meng Hao in planet form had already caught up with him. In the blink of an eye, the planet slammed into the stone egg that was protecting Yifazi. A huge rumbling sound rose up into the sky, shaking everything. The stone egg shattered and Yifazi let out a miserable shriek. Blood sprayed from his mouth, and of his 3 heads the one that was human-shaped suddenly exploded. Yifazi trembled violently and staggered backward, crying out in despair, "Dad, save me." Even as the sound rang out, he drew upon the flame of his life force to utilize a bizarre magical technique to project his voice through the void and outside of the mountain, and see realm into the realm from which he had come. An instant later, a powerful and terrifying pressure began to push down onto the ruins of immortality. At this point, Meng Hao in planet form shrank down, transforming into his normal appearance and then walking forward. Coldness radiated off of him as he extended his right index finger. Demon Sealing, 7th Hex Karmic Hexing. The wave of Meng Hao's finger caused countless karma threads to appear around Yifazi, karma threads that no other person would be able to see. However, Meng Hao could see them, spreading out and fusing into the void, where they seemed to be about to touch that terrifying pressure which was weighing down. Before they could, the tip of Meng Hao's finger descended, and the karma threads began to tremble. In the blink of an eye, they retracted, almost as if they had been locked down, and were now incapable of spreading out from Yifazi's body. "No," screamed Yifazi, his expression one of despair. More blood sprayed out of his mouth and he backed up further. At the same time, Meng Hao closed in, eyes flickering with the desire to kill as he waved another finger. Demon Sealing, 5th Hex. A rift suddenly appeared in front of Meng Hao's finger, only a few centimeters long. However, in the instant that it materialized, a terrifying power exploded out toward Yifazi. It slammed into his second head, which let out a blood-curdling scream. Then a rumbling sound could be heard as the head appeared to be swallowed up by the void, and then vanished. "Don't kill me. Meng Hao, spare me, and you'll sow good fortune with the Spirit Star realm. I'll definitely pay you back many times over. I'll give you endless cultivation resources, endless power. Anything you want, I'll give it to Y." Yifazi's final remaining head was quivering as he pleaded with Meng Hao. His heart was filled with regret, and his despair had reached the pinnacle. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he walked forward, raised his right hand, and waved it toward Yifazi. Yifazi's body emitted rumbling sounds as his chest caved in. His right arm exploded into a haze of blood, after which Meng Hao transformed into a golden rock. He slashed at Yifazi with his claws, completely shredding half of his body. Blood oozed out of Yifazi's mouth. However, despite having received such a grievous injury, he was still alive. Trembling, vision swimming, he was about to try to flee, when a strange light began to gleam in Meng Hao's eyes. He didn't simply want to kill Yifazi. More importantly, he wanted to know the Yifazi's origin and the secrets he held within him. Therefore, he was gradually weakening him and not just killing him outright. Just as Yifazi was backing up, Meng Hao took a step forward and appeared behind him. He lifted his hand and, eyes gleaming with a strange light, slapped his palm down hard onto the top of Yifazi's head. Soul Search. This was a sinister magical technique he had learned in the ancient demon immortal sect, a way to rifle through the soul and see a person's memories. Yifazi trembled, and his eye bulged as he let out the most blood-curdling scream he had let out during the entire battle. His body shook violently as indescribable pain racked him. At the same time, a tremor ran through Meng Hao. As he soul-searched Yifazi, memories suddenly appeared in his mind. "This," he thought, heart trembling. It was as if he were being struck by uncountable bolts of lightning, all of them exploding in his head and shaking his mind. Chapter 10:25, Soul-Searching Yifazi. Note from Urgen, not Deathblade, back to the normal release schedule. The past few days have been exhausting. Thank you for your understanding, brothers and sisters. Thank you. Chapter 10:26, 33 Realms, Mountain and Sea Tribulation. As soon as Meng Hao pushed his hand down onto Yufazi's head, his mind filled with rumbling sounds so intense it felt like it would explode. Numerous images and vast amounts of information poured into him from Yufazi's brain. Meng Hao's divine sense fused with Yufazi's memories, and he was able to see everything clearly. He trembled and began to pant, his eyes shining with disbelief. Although he had prepared himself mentally, he was still profoundly shocked by what he saw in Yufazi's memories. Yufazi screamed miserably as he experienced more pain than he had ever experienced before in his life. Never in his dreams could he possibly have imagined that someone who was as important as he was in the spirit star realm would one day be soul-searched. He frothed at the mouth, and his bloodshot eyes bulged out dramatically. His body twitched violently as he experienced a sensation like a giant hand rifling through his brain, grabbing things from inside of his head. The pain was literally impossible to describe. His screams were enough to cause anyone to seize with terror. Meng Hao's hand seemed to be exuding an incredibly powerful gravitational force as it latched onto Yufazi. No matter how violently Yufazi struggled, it was impossible for him to escape Meng Hao's grasp. At the moment, Meng Hao had no time to even pay attention to Yufazi's struggling. He panted as he looked at the thoroughly shocking images playing out in front of him. This, he murmured. He was looking at an entire world. In this world, everything was the opposite of how it should be. The sky was below and the earth was above. All of the buildings and mountains and rivers were suspended from up above. The sun, the heavenly bodies, the moon, were all down below. If you stood on those heavenly bodies or on the surface of the sun and looked up, you would see endless lands, filled with mountains and ancient cities. Within the cities, statues could be seen, each one depicting a nine-headed python. Meng Hao could also see innumerable life forms. Most of them looked just like Yufazi, neither completely human nor completely beastly. There were some that looked like ordinary cultivators. However, Meng Hao got the feeling that even though they wore that appearance, they were actually just like those other part human, part beast beings. The aura they emitted was one of complete brutality and mania. They were cold, with explosive, murderous auras. This was not any place in the 9 mountains and seas. This was a world that existed outside of the 9 mountains and seas. Although Meng Hao had never actually left the 9th mountain and sea, now that he could clearly see and sense Yufazi's home, he could tell that the natural law and the undulations in that world were different than what he knew. It was a brutal place that was diametrically opposed to his own world. It was as if in this other world, slaughter was the most powerful natural law. What is this place? He thought, gasping as his mind spun. Earlier, he had been certain that Yufazi's origin was mysterious, but now that he could see this other world with his own eyes, he was absolutely certain that Yufazi was most definitely not a being from the 9 mountains and seas. Almost in the same moment that Meng Hao caught sight of that other world, information from Yufazi's memories suddenly began to crash into Meng Hao's mind. They exploded thunderously inside of him, threatening to turn what he knew of the world upside down. In ancient times, the higher realm had immortals. Where there were immortals, paragons were born among them. Because of the position of that realm and because of its incredible power, it came to be known as the Paragon Immortal Realm. The Paragon Immortal Realm, the first realm in all the heavens in the starry sky. Beneath it were 3,000 other realms that relied on the Paragon Immortal Realm to survive. From generation to generation, they worshipped the immortal world. Countless living beings practiced cultivation with the hopes of being able to fly up and enter the immortal world. Everyone sought to reach immortal ascension. Spirit's realm, star realm, waterwood realm, deva realm, spirit star realm, torrent fall realm. 3,000 realms, all of which bowed in worship to the Paragon Immortal Realm. Anyone who descended from the Paragon Immortal Realm to one of those other 3,000 lower realms would be like a god. Epochs came and went, and after an incalculable amount of time passed, catastrophe struck. Everything that happened during that catastrophe was recorded on a huge mural that had existed for eons in the Spirit Star realm. On that day, in one part of the starry sky 9 suns appeared, which dragged an enormous colorful statue to sweep across the skies. The statue depicted a man whose hair was eternally white. 1. Regarding the man with white hair, I suggest you click the link to the following Baidu image search, look at the search terms, and then check out the first few picture results. I'm not saying that the person in those images is being referenced here, but it's certainly something that would have crossed the minds of Gen fans. Alternative search with more art here. On that day, in another part of the starry sky, 9 butterflies appeared, dragging an enormous coffin that crushed the void. That coffin was carved with the depictions of all living things. Both of those powers were strong enough to rival the Paragon Immortal Realm, and make all of the 3,000 lower realms tremble in fear. The catastrophe had just begun. A war began in which all of the 3,000 lower realms turned traitor. At the critical juncture, they rebelled against the countless epochs in which the Paragon Immortal Realm had weighed down on them. They joined with those other powerful forces to destroy the Paragon Immortal Realm. In that war, the immortal world was shattered. Countless members of the immortal bloodlines died, and numerous ancient immortals perished. The powerful All-Heaven Tao immortals perished, and the 9 emperors died. The only survivors were 3 great paragons, who used some unknown magical technique to form 9 mountains and 9 seas that became the broken remnants of the immortal world. 1. All-Heaven could be transliterated as Luotian. Luotian Chinese letter is a concept from real Taoist mythology. Among all the various heavens that exist, it is the absolute highest heaven. Luo Chinese letter is a character which can be translated a lot of ways, but in this situation basically means net. The idea is that this heaven stretches out to cover over all the other heavens like a net. However, instead of calling it net heaven, sounds like a bad internet cafe or perhaps a fishing shop, I will use all heaven. Incidentally, I've also translated the character Luo Chinese letter as Civ in the past, most notably in the name of the Black Civ sect. By the time the war ended, more than 90% of the 3,000 lower realms were destroyed. In the end, only 33 realms remained, which rose to prominence and glory, acting like 33 locks, sealing the immortal world completely. Later, those 33 realms took to killing immortals for pleasure, as a hobby. People who killed immortals and were baptized in their blood would become famous in all of the 33 realms. Meng Hao trembled as all of the information poured into his mind. He didn't realize it, but as this was happening, Yifazi gradually grew weaker and stopped struggling. Fissures began to spread out over his head, and the flame of his life force was gradually being extinguished. His soul was beginning to collapse, and his life force was being exterminated. Gradually his body grew cold, and his eyes turned gray. Cracking sounds could be heard as the information in Meng Hao's mind turned into something like a windstorm. Unaware of what he was even doing, and unable to control his own power, he instantly crushed Yifazi's head into bits. When the head exploded, Yifazi's body fell down into the void and gradually became a part of the ruins of immortality. Meng Hao lowered his hand and made a grasping motion, collecting a ring that had belonged to Yifazi. In the moment that Yifazi died, the screaming Chuanwu turtle suddenly quieted down. Its body no longer trembled, and it once again sank down into the pond, unmoving. The water in the celestial pond returned to normal. No ripples could be seen on its surface, which once again resembled a mirror. The cultivators of the Jai clan breathed sighs of relief. At the same time, Jai Tian's voice echoed out into the minds of the Tao realm experts in the ruins of immortality. Fellow Taoists, ladies and gentlemen, please be informed. The outsiders have been hunted down and killed. The massive waves of shock that had filled the 9th mountain and sea now faded away. The Tao realm experts who were already in the ruins of immortality stopped in place. After looking around at the mysterious ruins around them, they turned and left. Fang Xiaodao hesitated for a moment, and then also chose to leave. The ruins of immortality returned to normal. Everything quieted down. The eternally drifting corpses continued their never-ending journeys. Deep within the ruins, Meng Hao looked up, and his eyes were blank. Currently, all of the information he had gleaned from the soul search swirled around inside his mind. After a long moment, a complex expression appeared on his face. Although he didn't completely believe everything he had acquired from Yifazi's memories, based on what he already knew as well as his powers of reasoning, he was 80% confident that most of it was real. So is that really the history of the 9 mountains and seas? He murmured. The Paragon Immortal Realm. That explains some of the strange things I heard back on planet South Heaven. Immortals, his eyes began to shine with a bright light. The League of Demon Sealers must have something to do with the 9 mountains and seas, he muttered. In fact, there is a high likelihood that they also have something to do with those 3 great paragons. With that, he lifted his head and looked up into the starry sky. 33 realms standing guard outside, looking down upon the 9 mountains and seas. 33 realms, 33 heavens. As he followed this train of thought, he recalled something that he had heard from both the 6th-generation demon sealer and the 8th generation demon sealer's Jade slip. Mountain and Sea Tribulation. Each generation of the League of Demon Sealers must attempt to transcend the mountain and sea tribulation. Clearly, that is the tribulation destined for each generation of the League of Demon Sealers. In other words, they want to fight their way through the 33 realms, slaughter them to break through to freedom. Meng Hao took a deep breath. His mind trembled for a long time before he finally calmed himself. He knew that despite knowing about this secret, with the low level of his cultivation base, it would be impossible for him to completely understand it, nor do anything about it. The echelon, he thought, eyes shining brightly. Finally, he looked around, picked a direction, and began to fly. He took all of his doubts and speculations and buried them deep inside. He knew that the most important thing right now was to leave the deadly and mysterious ruins of immortality. He needed to get to the 9th sea and the 9 seas God world. I need to go to the 9 seas God world to collect the reward owed to me by the 3 great Taoist societies. Then, in the 3 great Taoist societies, I can grow stronger, step into the ancient realm, and then begin to search for my way into the Tao realm. If every generation of the League of Demon Sealers has to face the mountain and sea tribulation, then I need to continue to get more powerful. Eventually, the day will come when I will make my own attempt to break through the veil that covers the 9 mountains and seas. I will make my own determination of whether the information in Yufazi's memories is true or false. His eyes shone with the gleam of obsession, and his trembling heart gradually returned to normal. He turned into a bright beam of light that sped through the ruins of immortality. As he traveled, he looked at the ruins and corpses floating about, and thought about the legends regarding the ruins of immortality. Supposedly, they were a piece of the immortal world that broke off during that huge war. He flew along silently, divine sense spread out in all directions. He carefully avoided any dangerous locations, and was frequently forced to stop in place while various dilapidated statues or other gigantic creatures passed by. At the same time, images from ancient times rose up in his mind, images similar to what he was currently seeing. Time passed, soon half a month had gone by. During that time, Meng Hao passed through the center of the ruins of immortality. At times he flew along with explosive speed, other times he slowed to crawl. At one point he turned his head to find that, not too far off in the distance, was an area that was completely black, filled with countless weeds. Many of them were actually rare immortal plants that were extinct in the outside world. As soon as he saw that area, he felt like his scalp would explode. Well, if it is, his eyes widened. Chapter 10:27, Stirring Up a Sea of Insects. It was a land covered with endless grasses that seemed very different from the first time Meng Hao had laid eyes on it. Most of the grasses here were violet. They rose up tall and swayed back and forth gently. Rustling sounds floated across the land, but other than that, everything was silent. Nestled amongst all the violet grass could be seen a variety of medicinal plants. There were sun blossoms, immortality illumination vines, and other similar plants. There were even some types of plants rarer than those. You could say that this place was like an indescribably valuable medicinal plant garden. However, Meng Hao would never be able to forget how, although this quiet and peaceful place might look like a treasure trove to any other cultivator, it was actually filled with countless terrifying black beetles. The black earth was actually black because it was covered by the beetles. That was not even to mention the fact that the entire area actually rested on the back of a shockingly gigantic black beetle. It wasn't just Meng Hao. Even someone in the Tao realm would be so scared their scalp would tingle, and they would be forced to avoid the entire area. Almost as soon as Meng Hao caught sight of the land of violet grass, the grass swayed so much that the ground was visible in some places, and it seemed to be writhing and undulating. Meng Hao's face flickered, and he instantly lifted his right hand and performed an incantation gesture. Numerous sealing marks appeared on him, stacking up one on top of another, forcing his cultivation base down at rapid speed. Within a few breaths of time, a droning sound rose up from the land. Next, the ground itself looked as if a layer of it were peeling upward as innumerable vicious, black beetles flew up into the air. As soon as they flew up, they transformed into something like a windstorm that swept screaming up into the air. Their target was none other than Meng Hao, hovering there in midair. Apparently, there was something on him that aroused extreme aggressiveness on their part. Meng Hao's face fell. He had almost forgotten that these black beetles behaved in such a way. The higher the cultivation base, the more sensitive they were, and as of this moment, Meng Hao was vastly more powerful than he had been the first time he had come here. After considering it for a moment, Meng Hao decided that it was only natural for the black beetles to be able to sense him despite the fact that he wasn't very close. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Meng Hao immediately fell into retreat. At the same time, he continuously sealed and suppressed his cultivation base until its aura was similar to the qi condensation stage. However, even then, the black beetles didn't stop. In fact, there were more and more vast amounts that caused Meng Hao's scalp to go numb and his mind to spin. Could it be that they're still holding a grudge? Shocked, he quickly retreated, but they continued to chase after him, crimson eyes filled with hatred and madness. Something's off, he thought, heart pounding. Based on his previous experiences with them, he was sure that he was far enough away that they shouldn't be continuing to pursue him. His face flickered as he watched the black beetles getting closer and closer. All of a sudden, he realized that virtually all of the black beetles' eyes were fixed, not on him but rather, his bag of holding. Gaping in shock during this critical moment, he quickly sent his divine sense into his bag of holding. However, everything seemed normal. There was nothing different about it at all. In fact, the black beetle remaining from the group he had captured the first time he was here was covered in sealing marks and had not awakened. Is it because of this thing? He quickly pulled out the beetle and threw it toward the incoming army, but they didn't stop charging toward him. Why exactly are they acting like this? His face fell, and he lifted his right hand, causing his cultivation base to surge. The power of immortal meridians exploded out toward the black beetles as he directly fought back against them. Booms rang out, and numerous black beetles died. However, the vast majority were merely wounded by his divine abilities, not killed. In fact, it seemed to just make them angrier, causing them to attack him even more frantically. Furthermore, he saw that even more black beetles were flying up, beetles that were similar to the immortal realm and the ancient realm. His heart skipped a beat. No, there's definitely something in my bag of holding that's attracting them. But what? Without hesitation, he began to seal all of the objects in his bag of holding, preventing their auras from emanating out. At the same time, he fell backward in retreat. Eventually, he sealed a certain ring, and all of a sudden, the black beetles stopped in mid-flight. Then they flew around for a bit as if they were searching for something. They looked very irascible. When he saw this happening, Meng Hao broke into a cold sweat. Eventually, the black beetles flew back to their original position in the medicinal plant garden, where they landed, once again making the ground look as if it were black. Meng Hao hovered in midair. Not even taking time to wipe the sweat from his brow, he stared at the ring in his bag of holding. That was the ring he had recently acquired from Euphazzi. Is it this thing? Or something inside of it? Eyes flickering, he pulled the ring out. He had only given it a cursory examination when he had acquired it. It was actually a ring of holding, and required significantly powerful divine sense to open. Meng Hao was being extra careful due to the fact that he was in the ruins of immortality, and had planned to wait until after he had left before opening it up. Now, though, he decided that even if it took significant effort with divine sense, that it was definitely time to open it. Most of the holding-type treasures that Meng Hao had seen were bags of holding. It was actually his first time seeing a ring exactly like this one. After a moment, he slipped the ring onto his finger and then sent his divine sense into it. His divine sense instantly went as wild as horse with the reins loose as it was sucked into the ring. After only a moment of trying to open it, Meng Hao felt like he couldn't take it any longer. Don't tell me that because this ring is from another world where the natural laws and cultivation systems are different, I have to expend much more divine sense to open it. Frowning, he took out some medicinal pills, swallowed them, and then spent another hour working with the ring. Finally, after pouring vast amounts of divine sense into the ring, cracking sounds began to echo out in all directions. Next, everything inside of the ring of holding became visible to Meng Hao. After only a brief look, his eyes began to shine brightly. There were many things inside, and at first glance, Meng Hao had no way of knowing which one was causing the black beetles to act so aggressively. At first, he thought it might be the medicinal pills inside the ring. Meng Hao saw many types of pills that Euphazzi had consumed during their chase. One by one, he took the pills out and then looked over at the black beetles in the medicinal plant garden. Although he didn't know the names of any of the pills, based on his skill in the Tao of alchemy, it only took a whiff for him to understand them. The result was that he was more and more moved. These medicinal pills were clearly concocted based using a completely different system of alchemy than that which existed in the Ninth Mountain and Sea, which led to quite a bit of thought on Meng Hao's part. After a bit more searching through the ring of holding, he found an incense stick. An incense stick? Don't tell me this is what I'm looking for. The incense stick was surrounded by a five-colored glow which Meng Hao couldn't identify. However, when he pulled it out of the ring of holding, there was no reaction at all from the black beetles. He frowned and then sniffed the incense stick. He only took one whiff, but in that instant, his immortal meridians surged as if they had been intensely stimulated. In the blink of an eye, all of the immortal chi inside of him was sent spinning. What kind of incense is this? He thought. One whiff caused my cultivation base to erupt. He scanned himself with divine sense and could tell that in this very short period of time his cultivation base had progressed significantly. His eyes shone brightly as he looked at the incense stick, which he now realized was a valuable treasure. Incense sticks are meant to be burned. I wonder what would happen if burned this one. His heart trembled, but now was not the time to perform such an experiment. He carefully put the incense stick back into the ring of holding, looking very satisfied. This incense stick is definitely extraordinary, he murmured. It must be a precious treasure useful for practicing cultivation. Next, he looked back into the ring of holding at one of his favorite things in the world, which, in his opinion, were the least likely thing to attract the black beetles. They were black stones, stones that contained natural law. They looked very much like immortal jade, each piece emanating a mysterious glow and an aura of life. Obviously, this was a type of cultivation resource from Yifazi's home world, something akin to immortal jade or spirit stones. Meng Hao had no way to assess their value, but this ring of holding was far, far larger than any of Meng Hao's bags of holding, leaving plenty of room to collect the stones. In fact, there were at least 1,000,000 of the black spirit immortal stones. Meng Hao took one out to look at it closely, and was even more assured that his previous speculations about them were correct. However, in almost the same moment that he took out the black spirit immortal stone, all of a sudden, the land in the medicinal plant garden seemed to explode. Droning sounds filled the air as countless black beetles, even more than before, flew into the air. They turned hungrily toward Meng Hao and then began to fly toward him at top speed. Meng Hao was so frightened he started trembling. With a final glance at the black spirit immortal stone, he unhesitatingly sealed it back in the ring of holding, and then retreated at top speed. The black beetles continued to fly around the area for a few hours before slowly and reluctantly returning to their places in the medicinal plant garden. So that's what was causing it. Heart pounding with fear, he looked at the spirit immortal stones in the ring of holding, and his eyes began to shine with a strange glow. Finally, he once again began to examine the ring of holding. There were jade slips, one of which Meng Hao took out and examined, after which his eyes went wide. The jade slip was imprinted with information. In fact, after further examination, he found that all of them were similarly imprinted. Each one was some type of record, almost the type of receipt a mortal would get at a bank. Essentially, they were notes that allowed one to withdraw spirit immortal stones at pre-specified locations. Each one of the slips was worth 1,000,000 spirit immortal stones, and there were fully 100 or more inside the ring of holding. After getting a basic idea of how much the jade slips were worth, Meng Hao's eyes went red. All of a sudden, he was extremely interested in the place that Yifazi came from. At the moment, though, he was most interested in the medicinal plant garden. Looking over at the medicinal plants, he couldn't help but palpitate with the same eagerness he had the first time he came here. When opportunity knocks, he thought, rubbing the ring of holding. When he thought about the black stones, his eyes glowed with anticipation. This time he was prepared to make a killing. It wouldn't be like the first time, where he only managed to grab a handful of medicinal plants. This time, he would make significant gains, both in terms of medicinal plants and black beetles. That was especially true considering that back in the clan on planet East Victory, Pill Elder had given him the first volume of the Laws of the Tao of Insects. Having studied it a bit already, Meng Hao was confident that he could subjugate some of the black beetles. I'm going to subdue over 1,000 of them, he thought, licking his lips. Then he thought about what it would look like if he had a trump card of over 1,000 black beetles charging an attack, and he got even more excited. The last time Meng Hao was in this area was in Chapter 883. Chapter 1028, Stealing My Business. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as he slapped his bag of holding to produce the black feather, an item he could use to change his aura or appearance, and which he viewed as a crucial part of his inventory. However, he was also aware that these black beetles had unique characteristics. The last time he was here, it was only by using the feather and working with the meat jelly that he was able to grab a handful of medicinal plants from the area. Meng Hao knew that the aura-changing abilities of the feather would only work on the black beetles for a short period of time before becoming ineffective. Unless there's some way to continuously distract them, then the effect of the feather can be maximized, he thought, eyes glittering. He had long since noticed that the land mass which held the medicinal plant garden did not remain in a fixed location within the void. Rather, it floated around, almost as if it were not subject to natural law. In truth, there seemed to be some sort of pattern to its movement. After a long moment of thought, Meng Hao's eyes flickered and he flew into the air. After calculating the trajectory of the medicinal plant garden land mass, he flew out ahead of it. Whenever he came across a stretch of ruins floating within the void, he tossed out a sealed black spirit immortal stone onto it. Based on the speed this medicinal plant garden land mass is moving, he murmured, eyes shining brightly, it should pass by these sets of ruins in the coming days. He continued on a bit further, planting about 10 spirit immortal stones in various locations. Then he quickly shot back in the direction of the medicinal plant garden land mass and hid near the location where he had planted the first spirit immortal stone. There, he waited patiently. Time passed. Soon, after enough time passed for an incense stick to burn, the medicinal plant garden land mass appeared, floating through the void toward the stretch of ruins Meng Hao was hiding in. Meng Hao quickly reviewed his plan, then without any further hesitation, performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and pointed at the sealed spirit immortal stone. The wave of a finger caused the seal on the spirit immortal stone to be removed, revealing its aura. In the moment the aura spread out, the medicinal plant garden land mass trembled, and countless black beetles flew up madly into the air. They transformed into a black windstorm of beetles, tens of thousands in number. Eventually, they took on the shape of a huge hand which shot toward Meng Hao. Rumbling filled the air, along with hissing sounds as the black beetles closed in on Meng Hao. It was at that point that Meng Hao whipped out the feather and activated it. Instantly, he changed his appearance to no longer look like a cultivator. Instead, he looked like a black beetle, with an aura very similar to theirs. In that moment, the windstorm-like mass of tens of thousands of black beetles shot into the ruins he had been hiding in. Meng Hao quickly mixed in with the beetles, heart pounding, trying to look just as fierce and vicious as them. He even roared just like they did, trying to imitate them as closely as possible as they began a fight over the spirit immortal stone. Moments later, the entire stretch of ruins collapsed under the explosive power of the tens of thousands of black beetles, and was then voraciously consumed. The cracking sounds that rang out as the beetles chomped up the chunks of stones caused Meng Hao's heart to thump. From his perspective, not even Fatty's teeth could measure up to their mandibles. As for the spirit immortal stone, one of the fastest black beetles managed to consume it, whereupon Meng Hao observed as it let out agonized shrieks. Black light rose up from it, circling around as a vague ghost eye became visible. The other black beetles around it looked over with cold insanity in their eyes, as if they wished to charge over, tear it to pieces, and eat it up. However, before they could even move, the black beetle with the ghost eye looked up and roared. The mere threat of the roar instantly caused the other black beetles to stand down. Meng Hao looked on with surprise. Then, lost in thought, he went along with the army of black beetles as it flew around a few times, and then headed back toward the medicinal plant garden land mass. He remained cautious as he flew along with the beetles. He would occasionally click his mandibles, occasionally roar, all to make him appear to be exactly like the other black beetles. After returning to the medicinal plant garden land mass, he was careful not to attract the suspicion of any of the other black beetles. When everything quieted down, he remained calmly on the ground, prone, eyes shifting about. Eventually, he slowly began to sidle his way over to an area behind where most of the black beetles were, where a sun blossom was growing. A flash of light could be seen as the sun blossom suddenly vanished. Meng Hao was nervous but also excited. Afterward, he began to move carefully off in another direction. When he encountered other black beetle, he would click his mandibles and roar, as if reminding the other black beetle that he was just like them. Unfortunately, the sound of his roar did not resemble theirs very closely. However, he was an eager study, and constantly imitated them in an effort to sound exactly like they did. Anyone who knew Meng Hao and could watch this scene play out would definitely be extremely shocked and feel it was unthinkable. However, Meng Hao was getting very excited. Rich, he thought. I'm gonna be rich. He crawled along past one black beetle after another, first collecting some immortality illumination vines, and then catching sight of a patch of divine spirit grass. Eyes shining brightly, he crawled over. It was in this manner that Meng Hao quickly harvested 7 or 8 different medicinal plants. The glow in his eyes grew brighter and brighter. At one point, he turned around and noticed a tiny violet tree a few dozen meters away. Violet lightning tree, he thought, licking his mandibles. He had just begun to crawl over when, all of a sudden, one of the nearby black beetles looked up coldly at him, as if it were hesitating about something. Meng Hao froze nervously. He knew that one cry from the black beetle could instantly incite all of the other surrounding black beetles into a frenzy. In order to prevent them crying out in alarm in such a way, Meng Hao had been pretending to be even more fierce and savage than them. He had taken to roaring at them threateningly, as if he were on the verge of attacking them. Currently, the black beetle in front of him was shaking as if in rage, and its expression became extremely fierce as it looked at Meng Hao. Meng Hao glared back, taking a few threatening steps forward and roaring. A long moment later, the black beetle backed down, making room for Meng Hao to pass. Heart pounding, he slowly walked past the beetle, then hurried over to the tiny violet tree. A glow instantly surrounded the tree, and then it vanished. The disappearance of the tree apparently tipped the scales in some way, so that the black beetles finally noticed that something was going on. The whole land mass trembled as one black beetle after another flew into the air. Looking very agitated, they circled at a low altitude, relentlessly scouring the area. Meng Hao also flew up into the air, pretending that he was looking for something. More and more beetles began to fly up into the air, causing Meng Hao's scalp to grow numb. He knew that if the bugs continued to search, they would eventually find him. His heart began to pound when, all of a sudden, up ahead in the void, he caught sight of one of the locations where he had planted a spirit immortal stone. Immediately, he unsealed the stone and its aura. As soon as the aura spread out, rumbling filled the air. The black beetles surrounding Meng Hao went crazy. Eyes crimson, they turned to the world outside the landmass and charged forward, Meng Hao in tow. Once again, a set of ruins was destroyed and consumed. Another of the black beetles consumed the spirit immortal stone, and a ghost eye appeared on its back. Then, all the beetles returned to the landmass. Meng Hao once again began to scurry about, collecting medicinal plants. Anytime the black beetles detected him, Meng Hao would unseal one of the spirit immortal stones. It was in this manner that several days passed. Meng Hao had gotten quite familiar with the routine, and had already harvested more than 70 types of medicinal plants. Also, after having practiced his roar on numerous occasions, it was now almost exactly the same as the black beetles. "I've struck the jackpot this time," he thought excitedly as he crawled toward a turtle spirit flower. Suddenly, all of the black beetles around him suddenly began to stir in agitation and even roar. They also began to lift their heads and look off into the sky, their eyes cold. Meng Hao stared in shock and, without even thinking about it, joined the beetles in their roaring. As soon as he saw what they were looking at, his eyes went wide with shock. Far off in the distance, the previously placid void was now disturbed by ripples. The ripples spread out like waves on the surface of a pond, and in the middle of them all could be seen a figure, shooting effortlessly through the void, as if merely walking. It was a woman wearing a long pink gown. Her features were beautiful, and although she didn't appear to be very old, there was a slight ancient air to her. She held a lantern in her hand, which shed light all around her as she walked forward. She seemed to be a very cautious sort, and as soon as she arrived, she looked around to make sure nothing was too suspicious in the area before relaxing a bit. Almost as soon as the woman appeared, the black beetles, along with Meng Hao, roared and flew toward her aggressively. However, as soon as the black beetles got close, she lifted her lantern high above her head and then opened its side to reveal the candle holder within. Resting on top of the candle holder was a tiny white branch, currently burning and letting off flickering firelight. The woman didn't pause for a moment. She quickly sliced open the tip of her finger and splashed a drop of blood onto the flame. When the blood hit the flame, it turned into a cloud of smoke which spread out toward the incoming black beetles. In the blink of an eye, the smoke had surrounded all of them, including Meng Hao. Instantly, the beetles around Meng Hao stopped in place, seemingly in a stupor. Meng Hao gaped in shock until he realized that the smoke apparently had no effect on him whatsoever. Although it had spread out very quickly, the light quickly began to die down. After a moment of calculation, Meng Hao was sure that it would only last for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. The next thing he saw was the pink-robed young woman looking very pleased with herself as she sped down toward the land mass below. She landed on the ground, sending smoke billowing out wherever she went and causing the beetles that flew up to fall into a coma. She proceeded along carefully and began to harvest medicinal plants. Stealing my business, thought Meng Hao, and was instantly enraged. One of the things he hated most in life was when people stole business from him. Earlier, he had been scared out of his mind to harvest medicinal plants in this area. He had used more than 10 spirit immortal stones, and even spent several days pretending to be a bug, and in the end his effort had allowed him to pick about 70 medicinal plants. However, this young woman only used a lantern and was able to harvest 10 plants in one shot. That was something Meng Hao just couldn't accept. I hate cheaters. This wench is a cheater. Enraged, Meng Hao gritted his teeth as he watched the young woman quickly harvest medicinal plants. Finally, he shot forward. The smoke that had been used to put the black beetles into a trance had absolutely no effect on him. The instant he flew into motion, the young woman turned toward him and gaped in shock. As she looked over, Meng Hao performed the best possible black beetle roar that he could imitate, a roar that was remarkably true to life. Chapter 10:29. You're the insect demon. Almost in the same instant that Meng Hao's roar echoed out. Because of its incredible similarity to the actual call of the black beetles, the dazed black beetles in the smoke suddenly awakened and began to join him in roaring. Curses, thought the young woman, her facial expression flickering. How come one of them wasn't affected? Glaring at Meng Hao, she backed up, then performed an incantation gesture with her right hand. Not only did she crush the tiny white tree in the lantern, she also bit her tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, Meng Hao's roar was causing more and more of the black beetles to awaken. They began to fly out of the smoke, radiating savagery and murderous auras as they charged toward the young woman. Even Meng Hao had never imagined that he would be able to awaken the black beetles in this way. There were even some of them who appeared to approve of him and began to fly in circles around him, as if indicating that they wished to follow his lead. Because of this, Meng Hao now stood out quite a bit among the sea of insects. In fact, he almost looked like one of their bosses. Meng Hao's heart was thumping, but he felt quite pleased with himself. As for the young woman, he wasn't worried that she would be in any danger. After all, this was the ruins of immortality. The way that she had stepped out from the ripples the way she did left Meng Hao with the impression that she was in the early ancient realm. Presumably, she would have her own methods of getting away if necessary. He had no plans to kill her. His only goal had been to scare her away and prevent her from stealing away his business. At the moment, it seemed that his plan had succeeded. The black beetles were swarming toward the young woman from all directions. However, it was then that the white branch the young woman had crushed transformed into white smoke. After absorbing the young woman's blood, it spread out around her like a shield. Even as the black beetles closed in on her, the white smoke spread out and the woman vanished. However, as the smoke dissipated, something else became visible, a black beetle. Much attention to detail had been paid in the materialization of this black beetle. In terms of both physical appearance and aura, it looked exactly like the real black beetles. In fact, it was hard to tell whether or not it was a materialization or real. Meng Hao stared in shock. The incoming army of beetles also gaped in astonishment. However, considering that they weren't very intelligent, they had no way to understand what had happened. Meng Hao watched, furious, as the young woman in black beetle form quickly became part of the army of insects. Soon, everything calmed down, and Meng Hao continued to glare over at the young woman as she carefully crawled around on the ground looking for medicinal plants. What a disgrace, he fumed inwardly. She's obviously a cultivator, and yet she abandons all dignity to turn into a bug and look for some worthless medicinal plants. Is that the kind of thing a cultivator does? He truly felt that this young woman was completely shameless. Despite what he was thinking, Meng Hao continued to do exactly what he had done before, crawling among the sea of insects to the nearest medicinal plant and quickly harvesting it. However, as he crawled along, he suddenly realized that he was being followed. Behind him were a few of the beetles who had started following him after he had woken them up. That made Meng Hao stick out even more than before. Now he had a small entourage of beetles that looked almost like imperial guards. Actually, they made it much easier to harvest medicinal plants. At this point, there was quite a bit of distance between Meng Hao and the young woman. Not only were they not interfering with each other's efforts, but the young woman wouldn't be able to find out for quite some time she had a competitor among the sea of insects. Meng Hao, though, was as angry as before, and furiously harvested the medicinal plants with increasing speed. Even though Meng Hao believed her to be stealing his business, For the sake of being able to stay there longer, he could potentially have accepted the situation if she had refrained from interfering with him. However, the young woman's methods were somewhat heavy-handed, leading to several occasions in which the black beetles were stirred up. That, of course, affected Meng Hao. As more time passed, the black beetles were aroused more and more often. There were even some situations in which Meng Hao almost found himself in danger. In fact, with every outburst among the black beetles, some of the beetles would then start to patrol the area, forcing Meng Hao to stop his work. The increasing severity of these interruptions didn't seem to bother the young woman at all. However, Meng Hao was getting to the point where he couldn't take it anymore. He waited until the black beetles calmed down, then turned and sped toward the area where the young woman was working. Gradually, the two of them neared each other, and eventually, both of their eyes came to fall on the same patch of divine spirit grass, and they rushed toward it simultaneously. Finally, the young woman sensed that something strange was going on. She looked at Meng Hao and instantly recognized him as the black beetle that had discovered her presence earlier. The moment she laid eyes on him, she clenched her teeth, then let out a threatening roar. Meng Hao's black beetle followers immediately roared back and looked fiercely at the young woman. Feeling he had no other choice, Meng Hao got a bit closer and then transmitted, "Is there any way you could possibly be a bit more careful when harvesting the medicinal plants? Maybe not cause such a reaction from the beetles." As soon as she heard his words, the young woman looked at him, shock and disbelief evident even in beetle form. Why, you're an insect demon," she said hoarsely, looking aghast. An actual insect demon. Her initial reaction was not to assume that Meng Hao was a cultivator like herself, but rather that he was an insect that had transformed into a demon. Of course, it wouldn't be proper to blame her for having this reaction. In truth, Meng Hao's disguise was simply too effective. From her perspective, he really was one of the black beetles. Her own ability to transform into a black beetle came from a naturally developed power of her own. It was something that, in all of the 9 mountains and seas, only bloodline members of her clan could do. Other divine abilities of transformation could not possibly deceive the black beetles. She had never seen anyone do anything like what Meng Hao was doing, remaining undercover within the sea of insects. Furthermore, based on his appearance, and the fact that he had an entourage of guards, it made it so that there was no way she would ever think that he was a cultivator. In her opinion, any cultivator who could possibly entrench himself among the black beetles and even achieve a position as a boss, well, that type of cultivator would be simply too heaven-defying. "You're the insect demon," retorted Meng Hao angrily, glaring at the young woman. "Everyone in your whole family is an insect demon." "Listen, I got here first, so if you want to harvest medicinal plants, fine, but at least do it a bit more carefully. Stop stirring up all the bugs. Doing that isn't helpful for either of us." Meng Hao clenched his jaw in helplessness. The young woman was capable of harvesting the plants and obviously wasn't going to leave. Plus, if they started fighting, then it would be impossible for him to continue to do his own harvesting. The young woman stared back at him in shock. After looking closely at Meng Hao for a moment, she finally was starting to be convinced that this black beetle boss was actually a cultivator like herself. To her, it was almost impossible to believe. "You're really a cultivator?" she asked. Inwardly, she breathed a sigh of relief. Actually, meeting a cultivator here was a lot better than meeting an insect who had transformed into a demon. At this point, her eyes began to glow with coldness. "Well, it doesn't matter if you're an insect demon or a cultivator, or whether you got here first or not," she said coldly. "All of these medicinal plants belong to me. Leave immediately. If you dare to fight with me over them, then even if you are an insect demon, I'll turn you into a squashed insect. And if you're actually a cultivator, then I'll turn you into a corpse. And as for me stirring up the insects, well, that's my business. It has nothing to do with you. Now, get the hell out of this place." Killing intent flickered in the young woman's eyes as she promptly ignored Meng Hao and then closed in on the same medicinal plant that they had both been heading for to begin with. What a blockhead, thought Meng Hao, his eyes shining with a cold light as he too sped toward the same medicinal plant. In the blink of an eye, the two of them reached the plant. It was at this point that the young woman suddenly flashed, transforming into 3 separate beetles. She rushed forward at top speed to snatch the medicinal plant. However, Meng Hao was very familiar with how to harvest medicinal plants, and despite the fact that there were 3 of her, she was simply too slow. In a flash of light, he quickly harvested the plant. "Are you looking to die?" she cursed, her eyes glittering with killing intent. She suddenly spit out a blob of smoke which rapidly spread out to cover the area around them, including Meng Hao. At the same time, the aura-changing transformation of the black feather was sent into chaos because of the smoke. As soon as the aura was disrupted, the surrounding black beetles buzzed into action. Even the few that had been following Meng Hao before suddenly turned ferocious and flew straight toward him. Meng Hao's face fell. He had never imagined that the young woman would use tactics like this. Now that he clearly had the aura of a cultivator and could no longer conceal himself, Meng Hao had no choice but to fly away. As he did, the ground began to quake as tens of thousands of black beetles flew up, stared dead at him, and then charged toward him, causing a droning sound to fill the air. The young woman in beetle form backed up quickly, her eyes gleaming with a pleased look. Inwardly, she was laughing coldly. Meng Hao eyed the young woman coldly. The properties of the smoke just now had left him shocked. It clearly had the ability to dissolve the effects of his transformation. So, he thought, it was because you already had a magical technique that could interfere with my transformation that you attacked so decisively. You really want to kick me out of this place, huh? Well then, let's just see who can kick the other person out first. Laughing coldly as the black beetles closed in on him, Meng Hao made a grasping motion. Instantly, a spirit immortal stone flew out of his ring of holding, which he then tossed in the young woman's direction. As the black stone whistled through the air toward her, the young woman stared in shock. A moment later, it landed right in front of her. At the same time that the spirit immortal stone appeared, its aura surged out, sending the black beetles into a mad frenzy. Rumbling filled the air as the beetles that had been chasing Meng Hao roared viciously, then changed directions. There were also many other black beetles from other locations on the landmass that began to charge toward the spirit immortal stone, eyes bright red. The young woman's face fell. She could never have predicted that Meng Hao would be able to use a tactic like this to turn the tables on her. Although her aura was not something that would stir up the beetles, because of the black stone in front of her, she was now the center of a huge maelstrom. What kind of stone is that? She thought. It's driving the ghost eye beetles crazy. Well, it must be some kind of treasure, which means he can't have very many of them. At the most, he might have a handful. All I have to do is evade these crazy beetles for a bit and wait until he goes broke. The young woman clenched her teeth, backed up, and spit out another glob of smoke, which then surrounded her. Chapter 1030, Su Yan. It was true that the spirit immortal stones were treasures, and that he didn't have an endless supply. He only had about 1,000,000 of them. As soon as the beetle-form young woman spit out the mist and backed up to avoid the incoming beetles, Meng Hao laughed coldly. As he hovered in midair, he waved his right hand, sending 2 more spirit immortal stones flying out in the young woman's direction, cutting off her path of escape. As soon as the spirit immortal stones appeared, the black beetles went crazy. Massive amounts of beetles flew up into the air, at least 45,000 of them. They filled the sky and covered the land as they shot toward the young woman. Her eyes went wide as she saw the mass of frenzied insects. By now, she was thoroughly convinced that these treasures had to be extremely rare, so, gritting her teeth, she once again fell into retreat. In her attempts to evade the black beetles, she was even forced to use greater teleportation. I just can't believe that he has many more of those things, she thought to herself, taking a deep breath. Although she began to laugh coldly, she was actually quite shocked by the black stones. Next, Meng Hao began to throw out more spirit immortal stones. This time, he threw out 5. As they fell, the young woman's body flickered with light as she just barely managed to escape. The land shook as vast amounts of black beetles flew up in all directions, and then charged in the young woman's direction. Although her heart was pounding, the young woman looked over at Meng Hao, a cold smile twisting her lips. How many more could you possibly have? Meng Hao answered by tossing out 10 more spirit immortal stones, instantly putting the young woman in a very bad position. However, she remained convinced that Meng Hao couldn't possibly have many of the stones left. Just wait until you run out of those things. With all these bugs around, you'll be the one to meet a dismal fate. Gritting her teeth, the young woman continued to tell herself that all she had to do was hold on a bit longer, and then she would win. After all, she could easily conceal her aura from the beetles, whereas Meng Hao would be incapable of doing so. Because of that, she was certain that all she had to do was endure the commotion caused by the spirit immortal stones, and she could secure victory. He's going to run out soon. He definitely doesn't have more than a few dozen left. She clenched her jaw as she constantly was forced to evade the crazed beetles. However, because of the sheer number of bugs in the area, she was soon completely bedraggled. Meng Hao hovered in midair, the area around him completely devoid of black beetles. He looked down at the shocking amount of bugs down below and the teleporting young woman, and then waved his hand, causing 5 more stones to fly out. Then 5 more, and another 5. Over the space of only a few breaths of time, Meng Hao threw out more than 40 spirit immortal stones. Each one incited a virtual riot among the black beetles, and caused the young woman's face to fall even more. Impossible, how could he still have more? The young woman anxiously evaded the bugs. To her, the spirit immortal stones were exactly like weapons, shooting toward her across the lands. She had actually considered trying to grab them and put them in her bag of holding, but the crazed looks of the black beetles caused her to hesitate. She was worried that if she grabbed one, the beetles might very well rip her to shreds. All she could do was evade. As for Meng Hao, though, as he continued to throw out the spirit immortal stones, he was essentially controlling the black beetles, forcing them to chase down the young woman with deadly intent. Damn it, she thought, terrified and beginning to feel regret that she had so rashly tried to drive Meng Hao away. If they had cooperated, then she wouldn't be in any danger whatsoever. Time passed. 10 more stones. 20, 30, 40 blood oozed out of the young woman's mouth as she continuously evaded the black beetles. By now, she was glaring up angrily at Meng Hao as he continued to chuck spirit immortal stones at her. His supply seemed endless, to the point where her confidence was beginning to waver. Just how many of those stones does he have? As she watched the seemingly endless amount of spirit immortal stones being thrown at her, her scalp gradually began to grow numb. That was especially true when the available places to teleport to and escape grew fewer and fewer. Soon, her eyes began to widen with disbelief and astonishment. Impossible, she cried hoarsely. She almost didn't dare to believe what she was seeing, which was 300 spirit immortal stones flying through the air toward her like arrows. I've got plenty of these spirit stones, Meng Hao cried out, sounding very overbearing. Inwardly, he was quite proud that he was so rich as to be able to use spirit immortal stones to smash his opponent. It was a very domineering feeling. Although it had been a bit impulsive to throw out more than 300 of the stones, the current volley filled the sky as they shot toward the young woman. As a result, the ground shook and innumerable black beetles flew out. There were some who were similar to the immortal realm or the ancient realm. Terrifying ripples spread out in all directions as more than 100,000 beetles filled the sky. The young woman was terrified and shocked. Never in her wildest imaginings could she have envisioned an object which would provoke this kind of reaction from the ghost eye beetles, nor a situation in which Meng Hao would have so many of them. Hundreds of spirit immortal stones spun through the air. 100,000 black beetles were in a complete frenzy, roaring, their eyes bright red. They even fought amongst themselves as they charged toward the young woman, who was now certain that she was about to be ripped to pieces by the shocking onslaught. But then she clenched her jaw tight and her eyes shone with determination. As the black beetles bore down on her, she was suddenly surrounded by mist. In the blink of an eye, she transformed from being a black beetle into a cultivator. Then, she waved her hand toward the lands beneath her, launching a violent attack. It was hard to say what divine ability she used to attack, but it caused an enormous tree to materialize beneath her. It was fully 3,000 meters tall and conical, with the tip being located at the very bottom. As she waved her palm down, the tree began to descend. In the blink of an eye, it slammed into the land below like a gigantic nail, piercing down into the ground. Massive rumbling could be heard as the gigantic nail-like tree sank down into the ground. Next, a piercing howl could be heard coming from down below, as everything seemed to collapse. Countless medicinal plants were destroyed as the roar echoed out, shaking everything in the vicinity within the ruins of immortality. Meng Hao's scalp went numb as he saw the lands below transform into a gargantuan black beetle. Apparently, the nail-like tree had stabbed directly into its body, causing to emit an ear-piercing howl. Without the slightest hesitation, Meng Hao flew high up into the starry sky. As for the 100,000 black beetles, the howl seemed to drive them to their senses. They all turned, ignoring the young woman and flying directly toward the huge nail-like tree. The pink-robed young woman's face was ashen, and she was gasping for breath as she chose to do just what Meng Hao had done, fly away. 2 beams of light shot away off into the distance as the enraged howl echoed out. The intensity of the roar as it pierced into Meng Hao's ears actually injured him. Blood sprayed from his mouth, and his cultivation base began to tremble wildly, forcing him to stabilize it. The young woman staggered a bit, blood spraying from her mouth. Her eyes were filled with terror as she looked back at the medicinal plant garden land mass and muttered something. As for what exactly she had muttered, Meng Hao couldn't hear. His heart was pounding as he sped along. The young woman, aware that she had provoked a disaster, also sped along, face pale. The sound of the howl echoed about, causing innumerable ripples to spread out. The land shook and cracking sounds could be heard. Huge fissures spread out in all directions, each one of them hundreds of meters wide, filled with mysterious, glowing light. There were also wisps of mist that rose up from the fissures, as well as frost that spread out across the ground. At the same time, a droning sound could be heard, which grew stronger and more intense by the moment. Within a few breaths of time, innumerable black beetles flew up out of the fissures, turning the army of 100,000 beetles into an army of hundreds of thousands. They seemed to blot out the sky above. They flew out, roaring, transforming into a sea of insects that resembled a gigantic, pitch-black hand that shot toward Meng Hao and the young woman. From the look of things, the beetles wouldn't stop until the two of them were dead. When Meng Hao saw the vast amounts of black beetles flying out of the fissures, his scalp went numb. "This is all your fault," he yelled angrily. "I was just harvesting some plants. Why'd you have to try to hog everything? If you hadn't, they wouldn't be chasing us right now." "This is just what I wanted," she replied, sounding a bit sarcastic. "What are you gonna do about it? I want the ghost eye beetles to chase me. If you've got a problem with that, then go tell them about it." Meng Hao was extremely angry. As far as he was concerned, this young woman was being completely unreasonable. He snorted coldly as golden light flickered around him. His immortal meridians exploded with power, 123 of them, emanating 100% of their possible immortal power as he transformed into a golden rock. Flapping his wings, he picked up speed, shooting off into the distance. The young woman also used some unknown technique that caused her to blur as she increased her speed. The two of them whistled through the air. Although they were no longer on the medicinal plant garden landmass, the black beetles were still chasing them madly. Not only were the beetles not slowing down, more and more joined their numbers. A sea of insects like this, a tide of beasts, was something that would cause any cultivator who saw it to be shocked to the extreme. Rumbling filled the air as Meng Hao and the young woman sped onward. The black beetles seemed to have no plans to let them go, and continued to give chase, their roars echoing out in all directions. Meng Hao gritted his teeth and changed directions. When that happened, the sea of insects split, with one group following him and the other following the pink-garbed young woman. However, as soon as Meng Hao changed directions, the young woman's eyes flickered. Her body blurred even more, becoming nearly transparent. Suddenly, the beetles behind her seemed to lose track of her aura, then changed directions and buzzed through the air toward Meng Hao. "You want to fight with me? You're too inexperienced. From the moment I, Su Yan, awoke on the 8th mountain, no one has ever gotten the better of me. Now that I'm passing through the 9th mountain, there's no way I'll break my record." She looked extremely pleased with herself as the hundreds of thousands of black beetles chased Meng Hao. Eyes flickering, she chose not to depart but to follow along. 1. Su Yan's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Su Yan. Su is a surname which means awaken or revive. Yan means beautiful or captivating. Interestingly, the character Su is also used when she says the word awoke, making for an interesting character contrast combination in that passage. Furthermore, it's the same surname as Su Ming, the main character of another of Zhen's novels, Beseech the Devil. Once he's on the verge of defeat, if I threaten him a bit more, he'll definitely hand over the medicinal plants he harvested earlier to save his life, plus those black stones. I can definitely extort those out of him. Su Yan smiled resplendently. She was actually very beautiful, which was accentuated when she smiled. However, there was also a bit of crafty intelligence to her. That was especially the case because of the beauty mark next to her mouth, which made her even more entrancing. Chapter 1031, Trying to Control the Black Beetles. It was as Meng Hao sped away in flight that he saw Su Yan become transparent. The black beetles ignored her and began to turn their attention to him. Su Yan wasn't completely invisible, her outline was still vaguely apparent. However, she didn't use this opportunity to flee. Instead, she followed the sea of insects, smiling. The expression on her face was something very familiar to Meng Hao. Profiting from my misfortune. Meng Hao's heart went black with hatred. That was one of his favorite things to do, but now the roles were reversed. He was now the subject of the machinations of others, which was something he simply couldn't accept. This wench is just waiting until I get tired from being chased. Then she'll try to extort things from me. She must have her eyes on my spirit immortal stones. When he realized this, he snorted coldly. Spirit immortal stones are essentially the same as spirit stones, he thought, grinding his teeth. For someone to try to rob his money was equivalent to targeting his life, and Meng Hao's eyes were instantly shot with blood. As he fled, a sea of hundreds of thousands of insects whistled through the air behind him. From the look of it, they would die before giving up, and if he slowed down even the least bit, they would rip him to shreds and devour him. That was especially true of the black beetles, who were similar to the immortal realm or higher. They were incredibly fast and powerful, and were causing Meng Hao's head to ache. Even more nerve-wracking were the ancient realm black beetles. So you want to profit from my misfortune, huh? Well, we'll just have to wait and see who wins in the end. Eyes flickering coldly, he lifted his right hand, within which appeared a spirit immortal stone. As soon as the stone appeared, the black beetles behind him surged forward, roaring, their speed increasing slightly. A strange light began to shine in Meng Hao's eyes as he lifted his left hand and performed an incantation gesture. Gradually, magical symbols began to appear, which began to cluster around his left hand. In the end, they completely sealed the spirit immortal stone. When that happened, the spirit immortal stone flickered in an odd way. Suyan was still trailing behind the sea of insects, and when she saw this happening, she gaped in shock. Inwardly, she began to grow wary and slowed down a bit in her flight. She had long since come to view the spirit immortal stones as something very strange, and considering that she didn't know what Meng Hao was doing, it immediately put her on guard. During the space of a few breaths of time, mysterious light began to shine up from Meng Hao's left hand. At the same time, the spirit immortal stone began to vibrate, and the magical symbols on its surface flickered with light. Demon Sealing, 6th Hex. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with bright light. Then he squeezed his hand down hard onto the spirit immortal stone, causing brilliant beams of light to shoot out. Shockingly, he had imbued the spirit immortal stone with the 6th Demon Sealing Hex, life-death hexing. His expression that of determination, he flung the spirit immortal stone out, causing it to transform into a beam of light that shot into the sea of insects. It was just as if he were fishing for black beetles. Whichever black beetle got the spirit immortal stone would be consuming Meng Hao's life-death hex. Although the likelihood of success was not large, if he kept trying for long enough, he would surely succeed eventually. Light flashed as the spirit immortal stone appeared in the middle of the sea of insects. In virtually the blink of an eye, countless black beetles pounced on it, going wild in their struggles to acquire it. Soon, a rather large beetle managed to swallow it down, right in front of its countless compatriots, who glared at it covetously. It didn't take very long for the black beetle, who had swallowed the spirit immortal stone, to begin to tremble. After a breath of time passed, a boom could be heard as it exploded into pieces. The sight of it caused the Su Yan's face to flicker. Meng Hao frowned. However, he knew that the life-death hex's success rate was low and would probably be even lower since he was using it with spirit immortal stones as bait. However, he wasn't discouraged and continued to make further attempts. As he fled, he threw out more and more spirit immortal stones. Every time, a black beetle would consume it, then explode. However, the black beetles were as crazy as ever. Despite the possibility of dying, they still wanted to eat the spirit immortal stones. The pink-robed Su Yan continued to follow, watching with wide eyes and gaping mouth as Meng Hao used the bizarre, wondrous black stones. About 2 hours passed. Then, one particular beetle chomped up one of the spirit immortal stones that Meng Hao tossed out, and instead of exploding, its body began to shine with brilliant light and magical symbols. Finally, one particular magical symbol appeared which shot out toward Meng Hao, then merged into him, causing his face to light up with joy. In that instant, a tiny, illusory black beetle appeared in his mind. He knew that with a single thought, he could cause that black beetle to die. It worked, he thought, licking his lips. He only had the first volume of the Laws of the Tao of Insects, which was basically an introduction on how to raise spirit insects. Meng Hao was already confident in the use of those methods. However, although he had looked into how to control the insects, when it came to a comprehensive understanding of the Tao of Insects, he was quite lacking. In the end, though, that didn't really matter. He didn't need to study the control techniques. Since he had the life-death hex, he could essentially control them perfectly. Now that he had succeeded, he was much more confident. He was no longer anxious to flee, but instead allowed the sea of insects to get close to him and continuously threw out spirit immortal stones. When Su Yan saw this, her heart filled with amazement. Although she couldn't see any signs which would lead her to the conclusion that Meng Hao could control the black beetles, she was still getting a very bad premonition. She was even starting to feel that if she didn't take the chance to flee right now, she might find herself in serious danger. Just what kind of stones are those? They're so bizarre. She almost convinced herself to flee but couldn't quite make herself do it. Gritting her teeth, she continued to follow, making sure she was fully on guard, even more so than before. Time passed. Several days later, Meng Hao had already tossed out more than 30,000 spirit immortal stones. By this point, he now had control of about 300 black beetles. He didn't summon them to his side, but allowed them to remain among the sea of insects. However, the rest of the 30,000 insects that consumed his spirit immortal stones all died, without a single exception. Gradually, the number of black beetles he controlled increased from 300 to 400, and then to 500. Of course, the number of black beetles that died also increased to a total of more than 50,000. Finally, a rumbling cry rang out from the direction of the medicinal plant garden land mass, something that sounded almost like a summons. Moments before, having seen everything that she had over the past few days, Su Yan was completely shaken. She was even wondering whether or not Meng Hao might actually kill all of the black beetles. What kind of inhuman creature is he? She thought, heart pounding. She was really starting to worry that if she kept up the chase, something bad might happen to her in the end. From the moment she had awoken until now, she had never met a cultivator like Meng Hao, someone who seemed so mysterious and unfathomable that it filled her with dread. Just in the moment when she finally decided to leave, a roar suddenly arose from all of the black beetles, and they stopped in place. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. Based on his connection with the 500 black beetles he had control of, he could feel that they were being summoned back by the gargantuan king of black beetles that existed beneath the medicinal plant garden land mass. It took only a moment for the insects to stop pursuing Meng Hao and retreat back to where they came from. Apparently, the death of the 50,000 black beetles caused their king to give up on the idea of killing Meng Hao. Almost in the same moment that the sea of insects stopped pursuing Meng Hao's eyes flickered coldly. He suddenly extended his right hand and began tossing out one spirit immortal stone after another. The black beetles were now hesitating. On the one hand, they had the enticement of the spirit immortal stones. On the other hand, they had the call of the beetle king. A buzzing sound filled the air as the sea of insects ripped into two parts, one of which followed the summons, the other of which, composed of tens of thousands of black beetles, charged madly after the spirit immortal stones. Su Yan's face flickered. She had never imagined that Meng Hao would intentionally provoke the sea of insects. However, after a relatively short period of time, the black beetles simply couldn't resist the repeated calls of the beetle king. Meng Hao was only able to get control of a few dozen more beetles before they turned and headed back to the landmass. When that happened, Su Yan hesitated for a moment, then gritted her teeth and turned to leave. She got a very strange feeling after having seen everything that Meng Hao had done. In addition, she had an even more intense premonition that something bad was about to happen. At the same time that the black beetles turned to leave, Meng Hao suddenly called out, "Come." More than 500 black beetles stopped in place, then returned to fly around Meng Hao. All of the beetles had ghost eyes on their backs, making them look especially vicious. Su Yan, who was already some distance away, looked on with shock, and her mind spun. Earlier, she had felt as if something strange were going on, but she had never thought that Meng Hao would actually be able to control the black beetles. Heart pounding, she quickly did her best to escape unnoticed. Meng Hao's eyes flickered coldly. He had endured deadly pursuit for days, all the while being followed by the pink-robed young woman, who he knew was just waiting to take advantage of him. How could he possibly let her get away so easily now? My turn to be the bandit. He waved his right hand, using the life-death hex to cause more than 500 vicious beetles to suddenly fly directly toward Su Yan. Meng Hao himself descended to sit cross-legged on the back of one of the black beetles, from which position he stared coldly at the fleeing Su Yan. She was moving quickly, but the black beetles were by no means slow. 500 of them shot through the void, and from a distance, it almost looked like 500 ghost eyes, radiating mysterious light and sinister auras. How could this be happening? Thought Su Yan, her mind reeling. He can actually control the ghost eye beetles. According to the legends, these beetles are very difficult to bond. The only way to do so is to personally raise them from larvae, and even then, you have to utilize special methods to have the slightest chance at success. In this age, though, the methods for raising them have long since been lost, and yet, He's actually controlling them. Most important of all, what he's controlling are not larvae but full-grown insects. Su Yan almost couldn't think straight, and her face flickered with intense fear of Meng Hao. What she feared was not his cultivation base. She could tell that he was merely in the immortal realm. What she feared were his 500 black beetles.